there are three sections to this talk. We start fairly high level, talking about what a broadband network is and how it's run. Then we go into the three specific proposals we have in front of us. We're going to focus mostly on high-level differences, what it is that the sort of things that allow us to make a choice. Mostly that's what's the risks and what are the benefits. After that, we're going to go into how is this decision going to be made at town meeting. That'll be entertaining. So this group has been working for 2 years on this project. We feel that the three options in front of us are all viable, they're all good options, and they all meet the spirit of the town meeting vote in May 2016, which declared support for, quote, the building of a fiber-to-the-home broadband network providing ubiquitous service to all possible residences and businesses in Worthington. They meet the spirit of that. You'll see Comcast is a little bit different, but they're all good, viable options. All right. Finally, our group will not be making a specific recommendation because we feel all three are good options. Instead, our goal is to present the different risks and benefits of each option so that you can make a decision about what risks you, the town of Worthington, are willing to take. So let's get started. The thing I want to start with is drawing a distinction between construction and operation, because often they get sort of muddled, because both are complicated, both require a lot of money. The big difference is that construction costs are a one-time cost, and we can borrow as a town or as a company, you can borrow to pay for those construction costs. And that one-time big cost can be spread out over multiple years through borrowing. Operational costs, also big, they're an annual cost. The subscribers need to pay them every year in order for a network to work. So it's a distinction I just want to keep in mind as we go on. So, all right, high level, what's a broadband network? Broadly speaking, it's a network that connects houses in Worthington to the larger internet such that they can exchange data at high speeds. The federal government has a definition for a broadband network. They say that a broadband network is one that provides 25 megabits per second download speeds or better, and 3 megabit per second upload speeds. All right, I want to unpack what I just said. So let's consider an example. I have a phone. My phone takes pictures. They're about 3 megabytes each. The first thing I do, right, I take my picture. I want to upload it to the cloud in some way. I don't care if it's iCloud or Google Drive or Dropbox, but I take my picture, I want to put it on the cloud. That's an upload. That 3 megabyte picture is, the first thing to notice is I'm saying megabytes, not megabits. So there are 8 bits in a byte. So that 3 megabyte picture is 24 megabits. Excellent. So then I have a federally, a network a connection that meets the federal spec of 3 megabits per second. I have 24 million bits to send. It's going to take about 8 seconds to do that, ignoring all kinds of overhead. But let's say it takes 8 seconds to do that upload to get it to the cloud. Then I go home and I really want to get that image so I can print it. I download it to my computer. Again, I have this nice federal broadband network, 25 megabits per second down. I have 24 million bits to download. It takes about a second to download it. That describes an asymmetric network, right? My download speed is considerably faster than my upload speed. All of the networks we're talking about are going to have that. You'll see that repeatedly. What we want to be clear is they're all really fast, right? It only took 8 seconds to upload that image. DSL is about 2 to 5 megabits per second. We're talking about, and that's a download, we're talking about a minimum of 25. Okay. Let's get into the specific options. So the first two options, which are a town-owned option or a matrix-owned option, we'll get much more detail in a minute, but those first two options describe a fiber-to-the-home network. In a fiber-to-the-home network, you have a backhaul connection, which I could point to, but the orange blob has a dark line going to Worthington. That's the backhaul. It's a shared chunk of network coming from probably Springfield to Worthington. It can carry 2 gigabits per second, if we want to get technical. At least that, you can always add bandwidth, but that's what we're assuming. So it brings the internet into the town of Worthington to some central location where the network electronics are housed. We call it the hut. It's very likely to be somewhere near us here. It's a physical enclosure. It has a bunch of network equipment in it. From there, fiber runs out towards each house. it's very likely that we'll do what's called a splits in the field. The fiber will run out towards South Worthington, towards, you name it, towards what we call passive service areas. They will be clumped. So let's use South Worthington as an example. Fiber will run down 112. It'll get near to South Worthington. One fiber, or maybe a little group, will go, and then they'll be split off to all the houses in South Worthington. So there's shared fiber running down the road, getting to the houses in Worthington. The point of a fiber to the home network is that fiber runs all the way from the hut, the center of town, to the house. There's a piece of fiber that gets screwed to the wall of the house. The other term that shows up is GPON, which is Gigabit Passive Optical Network. Both of the options that we're looking at use GPON. GPON is a set of standards, right? The end hardware is built to a GPON spec. There are levels of GPON. The first level of GPON supports 2.5 gigabits per second down, really fast. And GPON 2 bumps that up to 2 gigabits per second. The nice thing about fiber to the home networks and GPON networks is you've got that strand of fiber running to the house. You can change the hardware on the ends. You can upgrade them from GPON to NGPON, and you change the performance of the network. So if we built a GPON network, everyone in town would have a really nice level of service, and then a business moves in and says, oh, I really need a solid gig. I need a really high performance. Well, they can pay to replace the hardware on the two ends. There's no replacement of the fiber in the middle. Just swap out the hardware. Yes, there's a cost to that, but it's not the same as running fiber down the streets. So these networks can support both residential class service as well as business class service. Let's see, what else do we have? The last thing I'll say is that fiber has a really long lifespan. That's why we've always been attracted to it. It doesn't have it's gigabit passive optical network means that it's passive. There's no active electronics in the network. There's nothing sort of to degrade except the glass and the connectors, which tend not to in the same way copper does. Okay. Next slide. So what is Comcast proposing? A very similar structure. The internet is brought to Worthington through Comcast's internal backbone. They run up to Huntington and Chester. I don't know how they'll bring it into town, but they're already right on the edge. Their backbone is all fiber. They bring it into town. They describe it as a fiber to the node network. So fiber comes down to a node. The node then converts that signal from fiber onto coaxial cable, which is a copper-based medium. And that coaxial cable is run to the house. Again, there's a bunch of sharing. The fiber is shared, the coaxial cable can be shared. But the performance over these systems is also extremely high. So these networks are built to a specification called Data Over Cable Service Interface Specification, or DOCSIS. And DOCSIS 3.1, which is the relatively current but not bleeding edge, can theoretically support 10 gigabits per second. Obviously, plenty fast for our purposes. Let's see. Of course, if you're going to, in all of these, well, I shouldn't say that. In Comcast, if you buy 60 megabits per second, you're going to get 60 megabits per second. You're up to 60 megabits per second. You're not going to get a gigabit if you pay for 60. They offer options starting at 15 megabits per second and running up to a gigabit per second. So that's all download. The uploads are about 3 to 10% of that. So I think they're 60 down is 5 megabits per second up. So clearly meets the federal spec, does the job. Okay. Next. What services are available over broadband? The advantage of broadband internet access is that the number of services that are currently or will soon be available. This slide is focused on entertainment because entertainment content is of broad interest, and also it is the major consumer of bandwidth in the internet today. But there are many other services that are also important for people. As a designer, I am directly and daily aware that most of the software I want to use is moving to the cloud, which makes it really hard to use without a broadband network. We're in a rural community. More and more there's interest in telehealth, which also needs a reliable broadband connection. Even relatively simple things. We have a solar array on our roof that needs to report to the state its production. For some reason, it can't do that over a satellite connection. It could over a broadband connection. Then you get into photographers and videographers who are dealing with really large files. They need to be able to edit them, and deliver them to clients reliably and quickly, and broadband is really useful for that. The list goes on and on. So many services. Now, the thing I'm going to point out, two things. One is that all these options provide internet access. They also all provide telephone service. It's voice over IP. It's going to cost $15 to $20 a month, depending on the details of which one. But they all provide it, and it can include all the voicemail and things we're used to. It's just telephone service. Comcast is the only option that provides television service, and Comcast is a cable company. It's cable television, as you would find elsewhere. All right. So who gets served? The answer is as many people as possible. All of these options have a minimum of 96% of the town. That does leave 20 to 30 people, or not people, 20 to 30 houses which would not be passed. We hope that we will be able to pass all the houses in town, but that's the sort of thing that we can't know until we really get into the design phase. When we get into the design phase, we look at the costs, we see what's feasible, and hopefully we can pass everybody. But we just can't say that yet. And that's true for all the options. Matrix is very committed to 100%. Comcast has passed 100% in the other towns they've done. All the towns around us who are doing town-owned, they're trying to get to 100%. We just have to see what it costs. The driveway policy is a little bit different for everybody, but I think it's safe to say that if you have a long driveway, it's going to cost you money. I think you can be reasonably confident that it's about $1 a foot, but it depends so much on whether there are poles, whether it's conduit, how far it is. There's so many details. Once you get over 250 feet for Comcast or 300 feet for the other options, you just got to see how it goes. Moving on. So those first few slides talked about the sort of design of networks and services. What does it take to operate a broadband network? Once the network's built, it has to be run, and there are a range of costs to operate it. Some of the costs are dependent on the number of subscribers, but many are based on the physical size of the network, the number of miles, the number of poles. Regardless of who owns and operates this network, who builds it, these costs are going to be paid. They may be hidden, they may be not very transparent, but it doesn't matter if Comcast builds it or we build it, the costs have to be paid. These categories of costs are going to get paid. They're going to get rolled up in your subscriber cost. That's what the subscriber pays for. This chart shows the cost estimates that we've been using, which are extrapolations from what Leverett's actual costs are. So on some level, they're a guess, but they're the best guess we can give, and they're based on real data. If the town owns the network, you can expect the cost to be pretty transparent. You'll know what your subscriber cost is going towards, what we're paying. If another company does it, you can have less levels of transparency. In this chart, you can see that the fixed costs, which is the top section, and those that are based primarily on the size of the network, come to about $380,000 a year, of which about $150,000 is the debt service. So the debt service is the payment over 20 years for the construction cost. Down below, there's almost $100,000 of variable cost. That's per subscriber cost. The more every subscriber that comes on will increase the cost a little bit. But you can see that the fixed cost, the $380,000 at the top, is substantially bigger than the variable cost. So the total cost in Worthington, assuming 326 subscribers, which as a side note is about half the town, the total cost would be $477,000 per year, at least to start. If we're operating it ourselves, we would simply divide the cost by the number of subscribers, and each subscriber would end up paying $122 a month. That's broadband only. That's our estimate. All right. So that's the end of that first overview, and I'm happy to take questions now.
What if the house is much closer to the road than reachable up the driveway? Can it go directly from the road to the driveway? or to the house, or does it have to always come up the driveway?
Typically, we assume that it comes on the same path as the existing utilities. So if the utilities,
Okay.
does that answer the question?
Yeah, you've answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, we use driveway length with this assumption that the utilities follow the driveway, but that is not always the case. And it's just how long does the connection have to be? They don't have to follow the path of the utilities. If you can find another way that's shorter for whatever reason, great. Yeah.
Hi. The option you showed on the previous slide for operations,
Yes.
that was for the town operating it?
That is those are the numbers that we have used. We have developed for the town-owned operation, and it does not include a Wired West consideration.
And the Wired West consideration is considerably less per customer?
I think that's an opinion, and we're not going to go there today. We'll talk about it later.
All right. We're charging $75 a month for high-speed internet, and it's a
Jim,
lot less
I would
than what
love
you're-
it if you didn't do this.
Okay.
You had mentioned that fiber lasts long, perhaps
Yes.
longer than cable.
That is the
So
Common
the
wisdom.
obvious question is Comcast is using cable.
So we'll get to Comcast in a minute,
Okay.
and we'll talk about those differences. Are there more questions? Yeah. Okay.
A couple of questions. My name's Tim Cena. I live up on Ridge Road. How many subscribers have you figured out there are in Worthington, and do all of these plans estimate the number at the same to come up with the price?
We'll get in as we go through the different options. We'll talk about subscriber numbers. It matters a lot, and we've thought about it a lot.
And the other thing is, what taxes will they pay?
That's
to
the other part.
Worthington, Okay.
Yep. Those are some of the big differences between the options. So we're going to get into that in just a minute.
Good morning, Krishna Gifford, River Road. Can you share a little bit more detail about the 4 to 10% of the homes that may not be passed? Is it? I'm not trying to. I'm curious if it has to do with edges of the town versus if it's a house that's like already sort of off the grid. Are those the kind of considerations?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to. So it's not 4 to 10%. It really is 4%, and it's absolutely. There are houses in town that get their utility service from a different town. How do we deal with that? There are houses in town that are off the grid and have no poles. How do we deal with that? We don't know how many of these cases there are. We've done our best to try to figure it out. We don't think it's that many. We think the 4% is it's a generous number, that it's going to be, we're going to hit a lot closer to 100% before we get into those edge cases, but it's safe. So obviously a lot of people are concerned about that 4%. Our goal is 100%. We don't know until somebody goes out and walks all of these poles and figures out where there are poles and where there aren't and does it accurately, which so far hasn't happened. We just don't know. And so that's why this is a trust us. I really don't think it's that many houses in the end. And when we get to that point, if you're someone who's 3 miles down the road and you don't have utilities to your house, we'll ask you, how do you want to do this? And there are a variety of ways we get there, but I don't know what they are yet. We'll have to address those basically case by case.
Is there a portion of this meeting that is going to break down what the cost is going to be per month per option?
Yep.
Like straight?
Coming next.
Thank you.
Steve Smith, member of the Select Board. You mentioned that only Comcast currently offers a TV option similar to what folks are used to with DirecTV or
Yes.
cable and other locales. But there are TV options available through broadband streaming from the internet, and I'm wondering if that could be explained a little bit at this point so that people have more entertainment information on the first two options in terms of what is available currently and what you estimate will be available down the road through the broadcast networks and so on via streaming?
Yeah, I'm willing to do that. So there's a bunch of the problem is that the world of streaming content is changing rapidly, and so it's very hard to know. All of these options are going to be built at, let's see, the least amount of time before we see broadband is a year. It's more likely 18 months to 2 years. We have no way of knowing what entertainment options are going to be available at that point. What we can say today is that you have streaming things like Netflix and Hulu, which provide all sorts of movies, and Hulu gets into television. You have PBS streams much of their content. There's CBS streams their content. HBO has a streaming version. So there are lots of ways to get that kind of content. What's often missing are the local channels, the local news, which is not to say they're not there, which is Channel 22 out of Springfield streams their local news. It's not the easiest thing to use. You either need a smart TV or you need some sort of box that connects from your internet to your TV that allows you to pick up that service, those channels. If you want to use your TV, of course, you can just do it on your computer. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on whatever device you want to look at. It's not plug and play today. Will it be in 2 years? I don't know. That may be important to people for it to be really simple setup. It may not be. I don't know that either.
So they're just starting to introduce services that look a lot like cable TV. DirecTV has something called DirecTV Now that essentially looks just like their satellite service. YouTube has a YouTube TV that's the same thing. So conventional, where you have an electronic program guide and so forth. The big missing piece is local channels. They're introducing them in the larger markets, and the question is, by the time we're online, will the Springfield market be there? And there's no way to predict that, but sooner or later, it's bound to be part of those packages.
Hopefully that answers that.
You mentioned that maybe 4% of the town might not get this service. I'm wondering about the people that are in valleys or something and they don't have cell phone possibilities. And I'm thinking that if people are getting phone over this, what's the prospects of Verizon pulling out? And then how do you get service to the people that have to rely on a landline?
Go ahead, Charlie.
Verizon's mandated by law. Their state, they can't just pull out. So the state would have to, we would have to become the incumbent provider because if virtually everybody in town had service, I guess you could conceive of that happening. But for now, Verizon must provide service by law.
For now.
For now. I mean, it's up to the state to make that difference, and the regulatory commission.
And this other states are saying if there's other options, then the phone companies can abandon their landlines. That's why I'm a little concerned about this.
But I think it's really important to note that it is extremely unlikely that anyone that currently has telephone service over a wire is not going to have fiber. Those are not the 4%. The 4% are people whose service comes from another town, which we may be able to get control and get to that other town and get up those poles. We may be able to put poles in, although that's very unlikely. And it's the other group are the ones who have no service, and so they're not affected. So, I mean, your house is a long way from the middle of town, but it's going to have fiber running by it because it's not hard. It's not a big reach. We're going down Kinnybrook.
No, I wasn't worried about me personally. Yeah. I'm fine. The other question is phone service available through this if a person just wants phone service and does not want the internet access and so on?
That's a very good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it.
Certainly technologically, there's no reason. So it's a question of how it gets operated. But
yeah. And
I believe Comcast would offer that option.
Comcast would offer it. Matrix, what's your take?
We would only be offering it to customers who are taking internet service.
Yeah, so you have to.
If getting internet service, would be paying for anything.
Yep. Okay. Seeing no more questions, let's get into the details. We're going to start, we're going to move through these in order that the town will be asked to vote on them. So we're going to start with the town-owned option, then we'll do the matrix-owned option, then we'll do the Comcast option. That order, you'll find later, is based on the amount of debt that needs to be authorized. So, town-owned contracted operations. I'm going to probably do more reading because the details are deep. So the first thing is that the cost to the town is estimated at $1.79 million. That estimate is fairly old. It's been around for a bunch of years. We recently talked with Westfield Gas and Electric, who's managing the build for many of our neighboring towns. Their current estimate is closer to $1.5 million. Great. We're going to use that higher number because we're conservative. And in fact, we're going to ask to authorize $2.1 million just to be safe that we've got contingency, in case issues arise. You got to remember with borrowing, you're authorizing an upper limit. We don't have to spend it. We won't spend it unless we have to. As a side note, I'm going to talk a lot about Westfield Gas and Electric because we're operating under somewhat of an assumption that we will partner with them. It's not necessarily true. We may, if the town decides to go with a town-owned option, the first decision for the MLP board is who are we going to work with. We're going to work with somebody. Westfield Gas and Electric is attractive because many of our neighbors are using them, because they are a municipal agency, and so we can work with them without going through procurement processes, which just make the whole process more complicated, and because while they're small, they have a lot of experience in this area, and they're very sympathetic to the idea of a town-owned, town-operated, town-controlled broadband network. So they seem like a good partner. I'm going to use them because I need some name to put in. We could switch. So the basic idea behind the town-owned option is that we hire Westfield Gas and Electric or another company to help us manage the design and procurement of construction services and to oversee the construction. Once we have a design, with help from Westfield Gas and Electric, and have acquired the right-of-way on the poles, the so-called make-ready work, again, we'll get help with that, we go out to bid for someone to build it. One of the nice things about Westfield Gas and Electric is they have a big procurement shop, so they can help us with that procurement. Once we've selected a construction firm, they build the network. Once we have a network, we can hire someone to operate it. In fact, we may decide we want Westfield Gas and Electric to operate it before we build it, so that because there may be benefits to knowing who the operator is in terms of equipment selection and things like that. Whoever we hire as an operator would handle the customer service, the repairs, the billing. They would be the sort of the front. We are not proposing that the town hire any employees. There would not be a significant increase in the amount of work that any current employees would do. The MLP board would be responsible for setting rates, for negotiating operations contracts, and overseeing the operator to ensure that we're getting the service we are paying for. There would be some annual reporting to various state agencies, but it's not expected to be onerous, and the agencies in question are shifting their requirements to allow for broadband-only MLPs because there are 20-something in the towns around us. Hopefully it's clear that the town-owned option, the town would have complete control over the design, the construction, and perhaps most importantly, the operation of the network. That's the main strength of the town-owned option. So what about subscriber cost? This chart illustrates the relationship between the number of subscribers and the cost per subscriber. As you can see, if the number of subscribers is low, the far side, then the cost per subscriber is very high. But as the number of subscriber grows, the cost per subscriber goes down. So we start on that side, your left, with 195 subscribers, which is 30% of the town. That's really low. On your right side, it's 520 subscribers, which is 80% of the town, which probably is a little high. We don't know. We have decided that it is not feasible for us to build a network with fewer than 280 subscribers. So we're going to do a pre-subscription campaign if the town decides to go with this option, and we will need 280 people to sign up before we'll start to build. That's what the red line is going vertically. The numbers are based on our current estimates, which we saw in that chart earlier, of the cost to operate the network. It also includes 100% of the debt service. So at these subscriber costs, the taxpayer cost would be zero. Let's see. So, as you recall, the bulk of the cost to operate the network of $380,000 are fixed costs. They don't depend on the number of subscribers. They just depend upon the size of the network. Makes a significant portion of the per subscriber cost, and as such, it is important to estimate accurately. If our estimate is low, then the per subscriber cost would be higher, and if potentially discouraging subscribers, which in turn drives the price up even higher. However, if our estimate is high, then the cost for each subscriber is reduced, which is good. The corollary to this is when comparing a town-owned network to one owned by a company, there is potential for the subscribers to end up paying significantly less if we find that the estimated operating costs are high. This is not true for any of the other options. They present a fixed per subscriber cost, regardless of how many subscribers or how big the network is. Of course, the opposite is also true. There is potential for the subscribers to end up paying significantly more if we find that our estimates are low. And this is also not true for any of the other options. It's possible, if the town were part of a regional group such as Wired West, that the operational cost for Worthington would be reduced enough that the subscribers and the taxpayers would benefit, even if a smaller percentage of the residents in Worthington subscribe to the service. All right, let's look at taxpayer cost for the town-owned option. So at the top, it shows the total cost of the estimated cost of the construction is $2.86 million. The state has allocated $1.07 million for us, for the town of Worthington to build this, so we need to borrow $1.79 million. There are two phases, right? There's construction and operations. The cost to build the network would be partially funded by the state, but the town would need to borrow that estimated $1.79 million. Ultimately, the taxpayers are responsible for repaying that loan. However, we feel that if the network successfully attracts subscribers, the subscribers can pay off the debt with minimal impact on the taxpayers while paying a competitive monthly cost. As I said before, the estimated cost is $1.79, but we're going to ask to authorize $2.1 million in borrowing to cover contingencies. We're planning for a successful, sustainable network, meaning fully self-sufficient and no impact on the taxpayers. In order to be sustainable, we estimate the network would need 320 or more subscribers. We are giving ourselves 5 years to get there, during which time we are saying that some of the cost, up to 50% of the debt service, could be borne by the taxpayers. After 5 years, regardless of the cost, the subscribers will be asked to pay the entire debt service. This is where the risk of the town-owned model shows up. If we do not reach 320 subscribers, or our estimates of the cost to operate the network are low, we will not have a sustainable network. We will have to decide what to do, but ultimately the town as a whole is responsible for paying the debt service, regardless of whether the network and the business model work. All right. So let's look at the cost over time. Let's assume we start with the 280 subscribers that we require to build the network. So the red dotted line is the number of subscribers. So we start with 280. Let's estimate that the number of subscribers will increase by 10% each year. We need a number. Until it maxes out at 450 or 451, which is just under 70% of the town, which is sort of a conventionally thought, somewhat optimistic, but reasonable number. As a point of reference, Leverett, the only town in Massachusetts that's actually done this, has over 80% of its town signed up. So 70% seems, it's a good guess. Let's further assume that the fixed cost to operate the network starts at $380,000, like we discussed earlier, but then grows 2 to 3% each year. In year one, the total cost to operate the network is $464,000, but we have only 280 subscribers. So doing the math, we would have to charge each subscriber $138 a month to pay for those costs, including all the debt service. It's more than $125. We've decided there's a cap at $125. We're not going to charge more than that. So we cap the monthly cost at $125 and ask for $44,000 from the taxpayers to cover about a third of the debt service. This works out to be about $63 for the average single-family taxpayer added to their annual tax bill. So the top blue line is the subscriber monthly cost, and the bottom, I guess also blue line, is the annual cost to the taxpayer, the average single-family taxpayer in town. That was year one. Year two, we've gained 10% more subscribers. We're up to 308, and our annual cost has increased to $483,000. Doing the math, this would be $131 per month, which again exceeds our limit of $125. So again, we ask the taxpayers to help out, this time for a shortfall of about $22,000, or about $31 added to the annual tax bill of the average single-family taxpayer. Finally, in year three, we have enough subscribers, 339, that even though the total costs have increased to $505,000, we can cover all expenses, including debt service, and still charge less than $125 per month to the subscribers. From there, the number of subscribers keeps increasing, as does the annual operating cost due to inflation. As you can see, once the number of subscribers plateaus, the monthly cost will continue to increase because the cost to operate the network is assumed to increase with inflation. But assuming the subscriber number does not drop off, the taxpayer will not be asked to contribute anything. So in this model, the total cost to the taxpayers of Worthington would be about $66,000 over 2 years, and the rest of the $1.79 million worth of construction costs would be paid by the subscribers. So this is a reasonably optimistic outlook. It's based on estimates and extrapolated cost. It's the best we've got. If the costs turn out to be higher or the number of subscribers drops off, turns out to be smaller, there'll be hard choices to make. This is the risk of the town-owned model. If it does not work, the taxpayers will have to pay for it. What about Wired West? So a few years ago, Wired West was proposing to build the network in all member towns. That proposal ran into a variety of issues, and the group refocused on how it might help to operate the networks in its member towns. The general idea is that while each town is small, and therefore the risk is spread over a small subscriber base, by grouping together, we can spread the risk across a larger number of subscribers and perhaps save some money. The choice of who will operate the network rests with the MLP in the town-owned option. Wired West is an option, Westfield Gas and Electric is an option, Crocker Communications is an option, OTT, and there are probably others. We'll have to pick. One of the advantages of the town-owned option is that if the operator we choose doesn't work out, we can choose somebody else. We own the asset, we hire someone to run it. That's the town-owned option. Now for Matrix. Yes, absolutely.
My name is Joe Boudreau, and I'm a member of the MLP board, but I'm also chairman of the finance committee, so therefore a numbers guy. And I just wanted to underline just one thing. I cannot count how many spreadsheets that we have done trying to come up with the numbers that Bart just told you. And the only thing that I can say to you and stress to you is they are best guesstimates. None of them are carved in granite. At best, they're carved in jello. So any one of them could throw off anything that we said today, and I just want to underline that. I've been working on this for a number of years, and I'm still uncomfortable with working with jello numbers, but that's all we have.
Okay, Matrix. So this proposal comes from Matrix Design Group, which has a sister company, Millennium Communications. They're based in New Jersey and are a pretty traditional construction company focused on fiber optic networks. They build networks throughout the Northeast for companies like Verizon, the Fios network, and Burlington Telecom, as well as institutions like Rutgers University. The general idea of this proposal is that the town would acquire a few things, most notably the right-of-way on the telephone poles, the so-called make-ready work, and Matrix would use these to build out a fiber-to-the-home network. There would be a sign-up fee, which is the same in the town-owned option, and a minimum number of subscribers of 365 subscribers, which is significantly higher than the 280 that the town-owned option would need. Matrix would then own and operate the network. The proposal is interesting because it shifts the risk from the town to Matrix. If the cost to operate the network exceeds revenues, Worthington is not left with a $2 million debt for something we cannot use. On the other hand, if the network is a booming success, we have the option to buy it. And perhaps we could save our residents some money or otherwise maintain local control. It's worth noting that while Matrix, Millennium have several decades of experience designing and building networks, they have limited experience operating residential networks. They are currently building a network in Petersham under a very similar proposal, the same proposal, and they were involved in a project called EC Fiber in eastern Vermont, which was residential, but they will need to scale up customer service and find local people to handle repair calls. We're confident that they can and will do so, They have a lot to lose if they invest $2 million in a network in Worthington. We're confident that they will do everything they can to make the subscribers happy in Worthington to ensure that their revenue stays high. In general, our conversations with the Matrix have led us to believe that they would be easy to work with. They've shown a willingness to work together to address our concerns. The buyout option is interesting, right? I guess it's still on the, it's not on my slide, but it's on your slide. The idea is that when we sign a contract, which would happen as soon as the town excluded the debt, we would sign a contract with Matrix, and at that, well, sorry, I should back up. When we sign a contract, we would know what the price to buy the network would be. It's likely to be higher than the build-it-yourself model because they're carrying the risk for the first 3 years. The idea is that after 3 years, the town could buy it. We would know the price up front, and every year it would decrease so that at year 20 it was $10. So the current proposal, the current estimate is that the buyout price would be $2.2 million in year 1, but it would drop by about $130,000 a year until at year 20 it would be $10. It's interesting for a couple reasons. One, it protects us from poor service. If Matrix, for whatever reason, can't run it, it doesn't run it satisfactorily, we could decide that we wanted to buy the network, and we could then hire a different operator. The second is that if the network is a really booming success, and we think that subscribers are paying too much, we can buy the network, hire an operator, and perhaps save the subscribers some money. So the buyout option is likely to cost more than the town-owned option, but you have to weigh that against the increased risk of the town-owned option. What does the town get for $926,250? So the proposal, as I said, is that Worthington acquire the right-of-way on the telephone poles and acquire the enclosure, the hut in the middle of town for the network electronics. Not the electronics, just the physical enclosure. And we would acquire the electronics that attach to each house, all of which is estimated to cost about $926,000. The town would then allow Matrix to use the acquired assets to build and operate the network. Once the network is operational, the state, assuming we meet conditions, the state would reimburse the town for up to $1.07 million, which should mean that the ultimate cost to taxpayers in Worthington was zero. The state has conditions on that reimbursement. They're fairly typical. We can't have outstanding litigation. We need to follow all the laws. The network needs to be built the way we agreed upon it. The subscribers need to be receiving service, and we need to have a long-term agreement. We don't see any trouble hitting those marks. So we're fairly confident that if we went with this option, Matrix would build the network, and the final cost to taxpayers would be zero. So how does the subscriber price under the Matrix-owned option compare to the town-owned over time? Matrix starts at about $101 per month. There's $95 of, this is all, I'm just looking at their standard tier, which is 50 megabits per second. Their cost is $95. There's $6 or $7 that the town's MLP board would need to collect because we need to pay rental on the poles. We got access to use, or we got the right to use those poles. We need to rent that. We need to pay for that right. So that would be our cost, $6 or $7 a month per subscriber. So the total is about $101 per month. Doesn't matter how many people subscribe. It's going to be $101, assuming they're more than 365, right? That's the minimum to start. Under their proposal, the prices are fixed for 2 years. Then the standard tier price cannot increase by more than the consumer price index, which is about 2%, without the approval from the town's MLP. So there's a fair amount of price control built into this proposal. This chart shows what would happen if their price did increase by the CPI over this 10-year period. So it's held constant for the first 2 years at 101, and then it goes up by 2.13% every year. We compare that to the subscriber cost on the town-owned option, which was on that chart before. The main point of this slide is to show that the two options are very similar in terms of subscriber pricing. It may be that the town-owned option is cheaper, but only if the number of subscribers is high and the estimates are accurate. The advantage of the Matrix proposal is that Matrix carries the risk, and the disadvantage is that the cost of the subscriber may be a few dollars higher each month. This chart doesn't really do apples to apples. The town-owned pricing starts with 280 subscribers, while Matrix won't be built, would not be built for only 280. They need 365. So I'm going to add a line to it. There's this dashed line that shows the subscriber cost under the town-owned option, assuming that we started with 365 subscribers and that number grew by 10% each year to the limit of 451 that we saw before. We'll get to, so the question was about speed. It's not half the speed. So I haven't actually talked about speed. The Matrix-owned model has two speed tiers. One is 50 megabits per second. The other is 100 megabits per second. Under the town-owned model, we haven't talked about speed. There are a variety of ways to approach network speed. One is the Leverett model, where we say everyone gets a gigabit per second connection. Those are shared connections. Ultimately, they all have to go through the same pipe to leave town. You're never going to, well, there are moments at 3 in the morning, if you're the only person on the network, you might actually get that gigabit per second, and that might be valuable to you. But most of the time, particularly in high use periods, if everyone watches the Super Bowl, it's a shared network. You're going to see significantly less than 1 gigabit per second. Matrix model is to say, look, we don't want to overpromise. We're going to say you get 50, and most of the time you'll get 50. Even in theirs, you could hit congestion and it might be an issue. This is a contentious topic. It's contentious within us on the board. It's contentious out in the world. I can speak to my own opinion, but I think we should wait until perhaps afterwards to hit this. But I don't know, what's your...
Yeah, it gets into how the internet works, and things work in bursts, and as Bart said, it's contentious, but there definitely is a difference between throttling people at 50 or 100 versus allowing them to have a gig when it's available.
And so the reason it's contentious is that, well, I don't disagree with Charlie. He's technically accurate. I think for the vast majority of us, our experience will be really similar, whether we're throttled at 50 or we have a full 1 gigabit pipe. It's just not going to be that different. Most traffic is web requests. They're small. There are a lot of connections. That as your bandwidth goes up, which is to say the size of your pipe goes up, those connection initiation, that overhead swamps the data. So you end up getting the same basic thing. You won't see a huge difference. What we've said in presenting these three proposals is that they're all viable. They all bring high performance, high speed broadband to the residents of Worthington, which will meet the needs of everyone or almost everyone in town at the basic. And for those people who need more performance, they all provide a way to get there. It will cost more.
What's the Matrix cost for the higher tier?
The Matrix has a 100 megabit per second tier, which is 135 a month.
So that would be more,
plus the town piece,
that
the
would
6
be
or
more
7.
than any of the town options if we wanted the higher, other than the risk of the town.
Yes, that 135 tier, it's 100 megabits per second for $135 a month. It would cost more than the town owned, and its price is not controlled. So they could raise it next week if they wanted. It's fixed for the first 2 years. After that, it's their deal.
That's important to include in these things.
Okay. Moving on to Comcast. Comcast is the nation's largest internet service provider, largest cable company, and third largest telephone service provider. As we discussed before, they'll be building a fiber coaxial hybrid network, as they have across the country and are currently doing in Montgomery. They've recently completed an extension of cable service in Huntington and Chester, and they're literally on our border. They would provide all services available in surrounding towns to us. Several levels of internet service, a variety of television packages, phone, etc. According to the agreement between the state and Comcast, in which the state agrees to provide funding for the project, Comcast agrees to an initial contract length of 15 years, and to keep pricing and services at the same level as those offered in the region in this 100-mile radius. This means that while there's no competition in Worthington, the prices would be similar to those in Boston, where there is competition. So there is some level of price control. However, we have no way to predict what the pricing will do over time, so I've not included a chart. I encourage you all to look at the Comcast website or the materials I assume Dan has back there. There are a tremendous number of options at a wide variety of prices. I've listed here $60 a month for up to 60 megabits per second, $93 a month for up to 105 megabits per second. That's what their website says. It's hopefully you'll go ask Dan about the more complex details. The other thing I'll say is that there's no sign-up fee and no pre-subscription required. Let's look at the finances for a minute. So Comcast has stated that the total cost to be $2.8 million. They're going to put $670,000 into it. The MBI is going to put that $1.07 million that they offered us for broadband in general. They've also offered another $571,000. So the total state contribution will be $1.6 million. Worthington would need to invest $571,000 into this project to bring Comcast. The structure of that deal is that the state would upfront Worthington's share. They would write a check to Comcast, and then Worthington would pay back the state as a cherry sheet assessment over 15 years. There would be minimal interest, but basically the annual cost would be $38,000 for Worthington, which works out to about $55 for the average single-family taxpayer annually for 15 years. There is no, this is the one option where the taxpayer is absolutely required to pay something. The taxes will go up, or it may be buried. It's a very small number, but it's only the taxpayer. We can't put this on the subscribers. There's no way to do that. So it's going to go on the tax bill. Okay, that's the proposals. Questions?
I guess one of the things that I noticed that was on one of the slides that I just wanted to ask about out loud was an early one as far as that, at least with the town-controlled option, that we'd have control over the privacy and net neutrality pieces. So if we wanted to, if the town decided it wanted to sell all the subscribers' information to all comers, we could do that, or if we wanted to do it to none. So with both Matrix and Comcast, they have that choice at least while they're operating it?
Yeah, so privacy and net neutrality are hot button topics right now. In the town-owned option, we can only control what we own. So we can control what happens to whatever we can collect within the town network, but all the data is going out to Springfield, and that's running on other carriers, and that will be their terms of service and privacy and net neutrality. We don't have a lot of control once it leaves Worthington. Matrix is pretty clear on what their privacy policy is. They're modeling a lot of their sort of policy documents on what Concord has chosen to do. Concord has an MLP and a municipal broadband network. They're not going to use their data, not going to use people's data, basically. Net neutrality, Matrix has said pretty clearly that they support net neutrality. Comcast has more complicated language, but basically they're not looking to sell it, I don't think, sell your privacy information. They have a more nuanced view of net neutrality. I hope Dan doesn't get mad at me, but Comcast as a company has been on both sides of the net neutrality issue. What Dan told us was that while they don't think the FCC should be involved in the debate about net neutrality, they are happy if the Congress gets involved and passes legislation that covers net neutrality. I can't go very deep there.
And one other piece of information I didn't see in here was question about the different options records on customer service. Now, I know you said that Matrix is just starting this up, so they maybe don't have a record. In the case of the town-owned option, we would get to choose among the operators, and I don't know if, say, Westfield or the other major operators have a record there, and certainly Comcast does have a record.
Comcast definitely has a record. Matrix does not have much of a record. Westfield Gas and Electric has a record in that they have their own broadband network that they're growing. I don't know that we have good visibility into any of them to really answer this question.
There's certainly national information about Comcast.
There is, and I encourage people to go look at it. I think for me that veers into the opinion world because I can't really state to fact on that stuff. But I encourage you to go take a look. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I understand.
Please.
With the matrix model, we have to have 365 subscribers or there is no network.
Yes.
So question one, what happens when we don't have 365 subscribers?
So this is we'll get into this in just a second, but I'll give you a preview. For options A and B, the town-owned and Matrix, there's going to be a pre-subscription period. It's a 90-day period where we have to go out, or Matrix with us, if the Matrix is involved, go out and get pre-subscriptions. People have to write a check and say, we're going to sign up. That's the number. That's when 365 matters. If they get 365, they'll build the network. If 3 years later it drops to 280, that's their
But if we
that's
don't
their
get
decision.
365 up front, there is no network.
They will
And
not
then-
build a network.
Then what? We have a whole nother round of this.
That is basically what we've said as a group is we will cross that bridge when we get there.
And then with the matrix model, we can buy it in 2 years and that price will start at 2.2 million, but we're at the mercy of whatever matrix wants to sell it at.
No, it's 3 years. It starts at 2.2 million, and the decrease is a linear decrease of 130,000 a year over that.
So it's never going to go
17 years.
over 2.2 million.
It will start at 2 and go down.
Okay.
The point
And
is,
then-
it's an asset. It's worth something. It's worth about 2.2 million. Let's say at the start, it's going to depreciate as we move forward. It's going to lose value. We, in our negotiations with them,
And that's
if we
in
get to a
that contract with Matrix, that price is
spelled
not
out in
going to
the
go
contract.
up. Okay.
The price is actually laid out what the numbers are. We're going to, if we go that way, we will have in that contract negotiation, there'll be discussion of how do we support reinvestment into the network. Because yes, the fiber asset is a 20-year asset, 30-year asset, and so it should depreciate. It's sort of a linear over 20 years. But the electronics are more of a 7-year asset, so there should be a reinvestment period, and that should be reflected in the buyout price. So.
And then, so again, with Matrix, it's, if I'm understanding it correctly, we're basically paying a little bit more money every month for less fast internet that we don't own. Is that correct?
Basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe we can buy it, but it will have lost its value by the time we're able to buy it.
Oh, it will have lost its value in that they will have gotten their investment back, but it still is a fiber network that operates. So
Okay.
It's not that it's useless.
Right. So, and then, I'm sorry. And then with the town-owned model, I tried to understand it as simply as possible, which is basically there's a cap of $125 per subscriber, and then for our annual taxes, it's going to go up about $65 a year.
For the first year.
For the
Right.
first year.
So year one, where if our estimates are all right, year one, the per subscriber cost will, if we didn't pay any debt, if the subscriber had to pay all the debt service, it would exceed $125. So we'll cap it at $125. We'll ask the taxpayers to pay, $63 for that first year. Assuming that the numbers of subscribers goes up, the next year we'll jigger it down. It'll be less of a taxpayer impact, still $125.
And that's for the faster network that we own.
So the trouble with faster is that ultimately these two networks are more or less identical. What Matrix has decided to do is to provide 2 tiers of service. There's no reason that the town wouldn't do that too.
But the town model doesn't offer a tier. Like
the
Matrix
town model
is offering the
doesn't
tier.
describe what the town model is going to offer because we haven't decided because we're not going to make that decision until the town has actually decided to build the network.
Okay.
There is a strong argument for following following Leverett's lead and having it just basically open. There are other arguments that would cap it.
So I think you can look at what other towns have done. Doesn't mean we necessarily will go that route. But for instance, Westfield itself offers a gig service, period. That's their only tier. Wired West is going to offer a 1 gig standard tier and a cheaper at the moment, 25 meg service is sort of a low-cost, low-income kind of option, but basically a gig service also.
Okay. So I
Doesn't
think
mean the town might not decide to do something different.
Right. I think I get the gist. Thank you.
Great.
Right now, what does the average person in the United States who has an internet connection consume? Because it seems, I'm lucky, I have DSL. It's 3 megabytes, I believe. Max is out at that, or 2.5. And I know I'm lucky, and I can stream 2 movies at the same time. If you had 50 megabytes, I'm answering my own question. What's the average? Do you know nationally?
I can't tell you what the average is because I don't have that number, but I can tell you that if you look at Netflix, if you look at their Ultra HD, which is the highest streaming, highest quality stream that they'll give you, it works out to 15 gigabytes over 2 hours, which is 7 gigabytes an hour, which is about 15 megabits per second. So any of these options will provide you Ultra HD. Now, everyone knows that 4K televisions are slowly getting there, and there's content. It is true that we will, well, at least some of us, will absorb more data in the future. I don't know if this is opinion or fact, but all of these networks will support, I don't know if they'll support 4K for everyone in town at the same time. I don't think so. But all of them have an incentive to keep their subscribers happy. And so they're going to have to involve reinvestment. That's what I was just talking about, that the electronics at the end of the fiber will need to be upgraded. And it'll need to be upgraded to support things like 4K television and whatever else, super high bandwidth. The other thing I'll say is we talk about streaming and we talk about movies and video because those are super high bandwidth consumers. That's when you're really sucking in a lot of data. And even when you're sucking in Ultra HD, you're just not moving that much data. It's 15 megabits per second is enough of a connection. So whether it's 50 or 100 or a gigabit, it doesn't matter. You can still watch a movie or 2 or 3. So the other side that most of us use, I think, perhaps I'm wrong, but speaking for myself, most of the time I'm browsing the web, I'm looking at emails, I'm trying to run some AutoCAD product. Those use significantly less data. They use tiny amounts. The average web page, amazingly, is 10 megabytes, which to me is huge. And there are 100 connections involved in getting that average web page. 10 megabytes is, I don't care. You can have 15, you can have 50, you can have 100. It's done. We're talking fractions of a section. Yeah. So, okay.
Then, I don't know, I understand why you don't want to give your opinion. Are we allowed to shade our questions or not? Not?
I think we'd prefer to try to stay sort of information-based.
Sure. So I'm concerned about the town-owned proposal. And the concerns I have is technology, as you indicated, changes a lot. We don't know whether Google's going to have balloons floating over here, which they're experimenting with, whether a low orbital satellite system will be in place, whether there'll be a 5th generation cell phone service, all that. Now, does anybody have a franchise in this case, by which I mean, let's say we sign with Comcast or we sign with Matrix or ourselves. Is there anything to stop another provider from coming to town?
No.
So, if we get our 300 subscribers or so, and cheaper, $70 and $60 a month service comes in to town, which is half as much as it's costing us to do it, or Matrix, what happens?
That's a risk. It's a risk that personally seems unlikely, but it's a risk of all these options. It's a risk Comcast is taking.
But DSL was becoming pervasive until cable came in the United States.
DSL has a really different set of issues that affect it.
All I mean to say is that technologies get leapfrogged all the time. And
so all of the things you name are radio-based. They're airwave-based. They're not based on any kind of physical cable.
Right.
And they have inherent limitations, particularly with capacity.
I think
they're
you're right.
they're getting higher all the time, and they'll continue to get higher. But the capacity on fiber as well is getting higher, and one's never going to catch up to the other. And there's going to be inherent limitations, and we're always going to live in a rural, sparsely populated area here, and it's only going to be served by so many things.
I'm not trying to. I believe you're right.
No, but when we rejected at least one wireless option for
I
the town
understand.
that was presented to us.
But this is why I asked the question about. I'll leave in a second. The competition, because there are people in town who only need 10 or 15 megabits.
Yeah, but
The satellites will never be able to give us a gig or 500 megabytes, but let's say they come in here and offer more. You already said it yourself, 15 megabytes, more than anybody, than 80% or 70 or 60% of the people need, and they do it for $50 or $40. Then the town lower use customers start moving over to this new service, and the critical mass of 280 or 300 falls below, and we've got a big $2.5 million infrastructure and a eroding subscriber base.
Right.
Is that feasible?
It's a hypothetical. It could theoretically happen. I think that it hasn't happened yet, and we're throwing a whole lot of money to get these guys to come into town, and they're still needing more money. So no one's going to come and build another terrestrial-based infrastructure.
No, not terrestrial.
So let's look at the wireless. Satellites here, everyone loves it, right? Yay! No,
I understand what you're saying.
It could be that Google floats balloons over us, but I think it's really unlikely. The high-end, sort of super high cellular stuff, that's all city-based. It's a different technology. It needs a ton of poles. They can do that in a city. They can't do it here.
So you don't think it's going to happen?
I really don't, but
But
then
if
it will,
does,
and I'll
we've
be.
got an expensive
That is the risk. That is exactly the risk.
I don't know how to follow it. I'm Jim Beebe from Ridge Road, and my question or supposition relates to that discussion. I'm just wondering, in your wisdom, which of these options do you think answers best to what we know is going to be an increased and high-speed technological advancement over the years?
And I know that it's frustrating, but I'm going to keep coming back to they all three meet that need. That's why we're presenting all three of them. We'll start with Comcast. They're a big company. They have the resources internally to keep investing. I have concerns that they wouldn't invest in a little town like Worthington. The state has made part of the contract that they have to keep investing in Worthington. So they will support us. It's a 15-year contract. I can say that. Matrix also, if the needs of the town aren't being met, it's their choice, but their choice is between losing subscribers and money or reinvesting. So hopefully they'll reinvest. The town-owned option is the only one we can really say, look, we're going to do our best to keep it up, but if the subscriber rate drops off, then we're in trouble. So.
Yeah, but more to the point, we know that change is almost indefinable. And which of these corporate options do you think has the best chance of meeting the need of a substantial increase in service over the years? We can't know what it is.
So the fiber ones I understand pretty well, and today you can go out and buy pieces to fit on the ends that'll have significantly higher throughput. So I understand that. The world of DOCSIS is a sort of black art to me because it's within the cable companies and it's hard. I don't have a lot of exposure to it. My feeling is they wouldn't be investing a whole lot of money rolling out new DOCSIS networks if they didn't think they could efficiently and effectively upgrade them to meet the needs of the future.
So all of these options are going to be...
They're equally well situated.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, it's a
Hi, Evan Spring. Presumably, broadband has benefits for the whole town and not just the subscribers, property values, tax base, whatever else. So my base question is, first of all, I'm sorry. Okay, presumably the broadband benefits the whole town and not just the subscribers, who were just half the household, as you mentioned, in terms of increased tax base and property values and whatever else. So basically I'm wondering I guess there's three quick questions. One is, why has the assumption in the first two plans, the town plan and the matrix plan, been that the subscribers ideally would pay the entire cost and not the taxpayers? Secondly, has there been any attempt to kind of quantify what those collateral benefits would be for the town and to whom they would benefit? And third, what other towns also assuming that the ideal is to have the subscribers bear all the costs?
So some of those veer into opinion, I think. I don't know. I think I could have picked two people, and one would argue that there's a huge benefit to the town to have fiber, and the other would have reasonably cogent arguments that it should be each subscriber and it shouldn't be a cost to the taxpayer. I personally will say that I am troubled by asking somebody in the town who really doesn't have any interest in internet to pay for it. So that's my opinion. But I think that world is opinion. I think this room is probably somewhat split on where who should bear the cost. We, as a group, decided that that there is merit to the idea that that a broadband network in Worthington benefits everybody, and therefore we were comfortable with saying for the first 5 years, let's let the whole town get this thing up and running, and then let's move it off to the subscriber. It seemed like a compromise. The matrix model, there's almost no option for the taxpayer to pay it. I mean, it would get tricky then. Matrix is very clear. They don't want to accept money from the state or the town. That's not their business model. You had three, and that. Oh,
other towns. What other?
Oh, what are other towns doing? Charlie, you're probably better at answering this one than I am.
Well, I can address the Wild West model, which allows individual towns. I think Jim mentioned there's going to be a $75 is the basic charge, and then towns will have the option to add something to that for debt service if they want, or to leave it all on their taxpayers. So every town's doing something different. But by the same token, the Wild West model, similarly to what Bart showed on one of those charts, as subscriber base goes up across the network, ultimately there will be excess revenue to return to the towns, which presumably towns will then use to retire their debt service. So it similarly shows that relatively quickly the subscriber base grows to a point where the effect on the taxpayers is similar to what we showed, that within a couple of years, if not sooner, there ends up not being so it does end up on the subscribers is really the short answer to that. Now, the towns that are doing this themselves, Leverett voted to put this all on the taxpayers, and that's it, and they charge what it costs to run it to the subscribers. But I don't think anything is being returned from the subscribers to the tax base that I'm aware of. In Leverett, and then the other town, Mount Washington, Otis, Alfred, I'm not sure what their plans are. I'm not sure what's going on in Westfield. I know they offer a flat $70 gig service, and whether anything gets returned to retired debt service, I have no idea in Westfield. Richard, does the MLP return anything to the city?
The bond goes through the city, but the plan basically is the debt service is retired by the subscriber base.
Okay, so that's the most common model, but Leverett's certainly a noted example that's different.
Thank you.
I have two questions not related to each other. So the first one had to do with the 4% number and what that is based on. I envision, we don't have very many of them, but multiple unit properties, do they count that as one, or do they count that as 10 or 20?
So it's been amusing over the last 2 years that the number of estimates of how many premises there are in town is widely variable. Everybody counts them differently. There are adjustments for seasonal homes. We basically, I know I did, I think the rest of us just decided at some point we're going to use 650 because we've had estimates from 600 to 700. So let's pick 650 and go with it. These are the things that get figured out when we go walking the line.
The state is looking at 4% for their
The state
commitment, though.
I think, so this 96% number, I believe, was picked out of a hat by the state and said, let's have everybody, we can't hit 100%. It's never going to be perfect. So let's pick a number that's reasonable. How about 96%? And it works.
To answer your first question,
what, though?
It will count units.
Yeah,
So if it's a
units in
multi-unit house, there are a few in Worthington, not a whole lot. They'll be counted as 2, 3, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
On the Comcast option, you talked about some kind of new technology that nobody knows much about, but Comcast is, providing that. And what I want to know is I'm somewhat afraid that Comcast might be offloading all of their
the classic
old obsolete stuff into Worthington.
The Verizon model of bringing the copper from Boston.
There you go.
Yeah.
Somebody's got a commitment that it's all new stuff.
I don't know, Dan, you want to commit that it's all new stuff? I assume, they're building it to the spec that they build everywhere else. There's no...
Built to the spec, we purchased new equipment in DOCSIS 3.1 that will be launched all over the country, will be launched here as well.
Yeah.
That's all I need to hear.
So I did also ask the question of Comcast when we met with Dan a week or so ago about business class service and whether there was like a gig, 2 gig service available for businesses if they wanted it. And in fact, even though it's this hybrid fiber coax system, fiber can be run all the way to a business, if I understood your answer correctly. Obviously, there's a price, and the business will pay for that to happen, and there's a different cost tier for the service as well. But it is a possibility for somebody that needs it. Isn't I right there?
That's correct. Gigabit 1 will be offered on the existing built network, and if you go up to the 10 gigabit service, we would actually bill directly to the business.
Yeah.
Ruth on Parish Road, which is way out on the edge. My question is, of course, about that last 4%. You talked about people who were getting service from other towns, but what do you think that end percent would be made up of? For example, we're on a dead end road. There are 8 houses. 2 are seasonal. Reasonable number of those people I don't think would get service. We're at the end.
Do you have telephone poles going
We
to
do
your house?
have poles.
Then I can't remember. Comcast, did you say you would, everywhere there's a pole, you'll run a wire? Is that, or not quite? One of you did.
So we get to the 96%. In every area of the 9 towns that we've completed, the 96% is a starting number. And in most of those areas, in those projects which are to be completed this summer, we have exceeded the 96%. The reason we would not get to a particular home in a particular area is if the pole line does not exist to get to that particular pocket that may then be served from another area of town. In addition to that, once we did the full engineering report, we would have a reconciliation meeting, as we did with every other town, that we would go over all of the to-be-built areas to get approval from the town. And in every instance, we have exceeded the 96%.
So, for example, if I'm a mile down the road from the main drag, and suppose I was the only house on that road that wanted internet, would that change the formula?
So it's never been an issue for us in the 9 towns about people who wanted service. We are building to that percentage and in excess of that percentage, even if we were unable to secure a customer.
Yeah, you got to remember with Comcast, there's no pre-subscription. They don't know if you'll take the service or not. They're just building the network. Matrix, Chris, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, we're basically committing to building the entire town. If there's poles, if your utilities come in via poles, we're committed to building your house, whether you're the first house on the road or the last house. We're building in the town of Peterson. Right now, we're going to be passing over 100% of the town. You ask, how's that possible? We're actually going into the town of Athol to come back in, and some of the people in Athol will actually take the service as well. So we're also willing to build in the town of Middlefield as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and if I could just, one more.
Yes.
It was asked earlier as far as committing to upgrades. Part of our agreement suggests or says that we will commit to being equal or better to the FCC's definition of broadband. Today, that's 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. If 10 years from now it goes to 100 by 100, that's what our minimum service will be.
So the only option that you're not hearing about is the town-owned option, and it's the tricky one because that's the one where we have to do the design and figure out, we're not experts in this world. So we go to Westfield Gas and Electric, we get a design, we look at it, we say, okay, this is 96, how can we get to 100? And then we look at the cost. And
So that would be the case where I think you're at the end of the road, you're a mile from anybody else taking service. We probably would ask you, are you going to take service or not? Yeah, right. And if you said no, we wouldn't spend the money to build down there. I think is really what it would come down to, because we'll try to build it as cheaply as we can because we're using the town's money. So, but I think the real issues are simply going to be people that A, are off the grid and don't have utilities, and what's it going to take if they want service, and B, are the very few people, and we really only know for sure of one, that's actually getting utilities from another town, and that just creates a whole series of issues that we'll try to address, but could be the tough ones.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. Allison Todd, Goss Hill Road. I have 3 quick questions, I think, and I wrote them on my hand, so I don't forget them. The first one for the town option, if that's voted on and approved, then do you get voter input into who you contract with, or is that a decision made by the MLB?
So the Municipal Light Board, which was elected last year, we're just a town department. All our meetings are posted. Mm-hmm. We welcome people coming. Those decisions we made at an open meeting.
Right.
That discussion will happen.
Okay.
So
great.
It's not I don't foresee us coming back to the town and saying, here are the 3 operators, pick one, because I don't think it's going to be that kind of decision.
Yeah. You said the state has set sort of parameters for the Comcast's contract for the 15 years. Can we reasonably assume that the state would be involved in recontracting and supporting a beneficial contract for Worthington after 15 years?
So I'm going to pull Larkin in a minute, but there are 2 pieces of, you guys, Dan, you can correct me too, but when a cable company comes into a town, they have to have a cable franchise agreement with the town, and that agreement covers television only, but it also covers the network that television is provided over. So there's some pieces of it that sort of affect the internet access, but it's really about television. And they have to have that franchise agreement in place before they can operate. So what the state is doing, as I understand, is saying, Comcast, we're going to let you have this money, and we want you to sign a 15-year agreement of what you're going to do in exchange for the money. That agreement, I assume after 15 years, the agreement is done, they've got their money, they've done what they were supposed to do, there's not going to be a second agreement with the state. However, there will be, at the same time, Worthington will enter a cable franchise agreement with Comcast. I don't know if it'll be a 15-year agreement also, I think it may be. And after it's done, we will need another cable franchise agreement with Comcast. It covers the network and the television, but it doesn't necessarily cover the internet access. So
we wouldn't have the same guarantee that it sounds like we might have from Matrix, that it would always meet minimum broadband specifications.
Dan.
I can make that commitment that we have not only always met them, we have exceeded them.
Okay. Third question. I noticed in the first 2, the town-owned and the Matrix owned and operated, if you don't subscribe right from the beginning, there's a fairly significant connection cost. And I'm wondering, first of all, is there any way that the town would assist, is that a definite, or could the town assist with new connections? And is that only for new building, or is that any property that hasn't been connected, if they don't connect at the beginning, they've got to pay $2,500?
These are good questions. This gets to this 4% question too. When these networks are built, and I can't really speak to Comcast, but I think Matrix and town-owned are similar. The idea is that you look at the town and you look at what houses are there, what lots are available that houses could be on, and you try to build a network that supports both existing houses and new houses, has enough stuff because you don't want to do this again. Then you go out to each house, everyone that's subscribed, and you take a connection from the road to the house. Since you're doing this all as one group, you've got this crew in town, they're doing it, you can make it relatively cheap. You're also incentivizing signups because you want to get started with a number that's big. 3 years from now, when the network's up and running, there'll be fiber on the road past your house that you didn't subscribe or past this new house that didn't exist. And then there's this question of, okay, in order to run that fiber from the road to that house, the truck's got to come out, they've got to do whatever they've got to do, and they've got to make it happen. There's a cost to that. There is no reason that the ML board, in the town-owned option, that the MLP board couldn't say, look, we need subscribers, it's worth investing money to get those people. So we could have a special, sign up now for $250 or whatever. There's no reason we couldn't. What we know is that Leverett currently charges $2,500. So we know that's roughly the cost to do one of these because that's what they're charging is the actual cost.
I think my concern is lower income households, $2,500 would be a lot if something changed in the future and they needed to subscribe.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff, this is where it gets into local control, is that if we own it, then we can understand what we've got and we can try to work with it and try to understand how we can solve those problems.
So with the Comcast option, they have the coaxial, which is significantly slower than the other two. It can't reach the same speeds that the other two can.
That's not true.
Not true?
Not true.
Coax can go just as fast as fiber.
DOCSIS 3.1, the theoretical limit is 10 gigabits per second.
Okay. In 15 years, if we do the Comcast option, what happens if we feel that we're not getting the service that we want and we want to change providers? What happens to that network?
The network, so the Comcast network that will be built is basically a proprietary network. There will never be a time that the town could buy it or use it or in any way take advantage of its presence except for Comcast running it.
Or influence its service that it provides us. So we'd be basically getting a slightly better version of what Verizon gives us now.
So there's nothing to prevent us from building our own network at any point in time other than the cost to get on the poles. The more wires up there, the more work it takes to make room for yet another one. So, but that's exactly what's happening in Westfield right now.
But if we're
Westfield Gas and Electric is overbuilding where Comcast already has a network, and they're drawing away, some of their customers, and they're competing with each other. And there are many places in the state and the country where that happens.
So if we do Comcast, we'd have to pay the $500 in taxes immediately, and then in 15 years, we might want to vote to build a whole new network for $2 million.
Right. So that is the risk with Comcast. It costs money up front, and
we have no say in how it's operated.
Don't get any. I mean, we don't have an asset at the end of the day.
Right.
They own it. They control it.
Hi. I have two questions. One is going to be substantive. Two is going to be procedural. Substantive issue that hasn't actually been talked about is how quickly will the internet be brought to with all three options? It seems like the first option. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and there's a lot of options available to those people. So and it seems nice, but it just seems like it's going to take a long time. 2 and 3, the Xfinity. Which goes to a third question, which is procedural in regards to Xfinity and Matrix. Legally, since they're talking back there, like nothing that they're saying can be really held against them or contractually. It'd be nice if they had it in writing, but I was hoping maybe that they could come up here and talk into the microphone that it's recorded over here, so it can be used legally. Against it, I would appreciate that. I think a lot of people here would like to see that too, and also answer questions maybe from the panel here. So that'd be great.
Fair enough. The three options: the town-owned, the estimate is 18 to 24 months. And that really is after the pre-subscription period has ended, or let's say after we've hit 280 subscriptions. So in the next slides, we'll talk about more detail about the timeline, but that's after we've gotten the 280. Matrix is saying 10 months to the first subscriber after the pre-subscription, they've gotten that 365 number. That's the first subscriber. The network will be complete after 18 to 24 months. Matrix has the advantage that they can sort of turn on as they build. The town-owned option, we may be able to do that, but we may not be able to. It's vague. Comcast, Dan, I don't remember what you said.
We average about a year to 18 months.
So maybe a little bit quicker for Comcast than the 18 to 24, but I think my sense is they're all about the same. Maybe the commercial ones are a little bit quicker. As you said, there's a lot of complexity in the town-owned one.
Before we take another question, just real quick, I'm going to pass this clipboard around. If we could get people to sign up. We didn't collect names as you came in, but we do have a mailing list. Probably most of you are on it, but if you're not in particular, it'd be great to have you, and we can keep you on our email list. Thanks.
Yeah, I have two questions. My first question is, if we use the town option and we contract with a service provider, will they give us a most favored nation? I mean, will they give us an agreement that says they're going to not charge us more than they charge in other towns? Have we discussed that?
We haven't discussed it, and so our stance on the Broadband Committee and the MLP has been that we know that the town-owned option is viable. We know there are a bunch of operators out there, and if the town wants to go that way, then we'll start talking to them and figure out the details.
My second question really relates to what I call the gorilla in the room. We've had meetings where we've had state representatives present, and everybody seems to think that the amount the state is contributing is $1 million, that's all there is from the state. Because our state representatives have not asked for more. I don't recall, in the eastern Massachusetts, them asking us whether we would be benefited by the big dig. But every taxpayer paid that. Now, I also understand why you distinguish between taxpayers and subscribers, but the subscribers are the taxpayers, right, for the most part. So, if you were trying to make it more attractive for the vote or whatever, to distinguish between them. But we see the state saying they'll give an extra $570,000 to Comcast. And why wouldn't they give it under any other option? If the money's available for Comcast, why isn't it available to the town under, our own options? So I would strongly recommend that people contact their state representative and ask what they're doing for us in the hill towns of Western Massachusetts.
So, do you want to answer this, Larkin? Sure. I want to say that Steve Kulik has been incredibly supportive of broadband and incredibly useful in this process. So I want to make that really clear.
My question is, where's the money?
Yeah. Well, I'm Peter Larkin. I'm the board chair of the Mass Broadband Institute. I'm also special advisor to the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. And I will stand here and reiterate what you just reminded me of, is Steve Kulik has been a long advocate of providing these funds, and there was a bond authorization that occurred a number of years ago that brought the first $50 million that was intended to be the support monies for the town. The vision then was that the state was going to put up a third of the dollars and build the network, with the towns putting up 2/3 of the dollars. We've now gone down in a couple different directions here. When the Baker and Polito administration, and they took on that proposal that was made, and it was like 8 years in process with very little to show for it, save for Leverett. We've gone forward and created what we call now, we've done a couple different programs. We had a private provider RFP that brought the cable companies forward, and they took the state's allocations to the communities, and they're building the broadband networks in those towns for only that allocation. So they're putting their own capital into those projects. We also saw that there was a great pent-up need, and Wired West was a generator of this idea of creating, in part, the HED, what they call the Last Mile Grant Program, where the municipalities take on this initiative. And we took our what they call our professional development monies and we pushed them on the table. And so we resulted in many towns having a 40% match to the 60% that they would pay. Remember, before it was 1/3, 2/3, now it's a 40-60. And towns are going forward with their own programs. We've also realized as we went down that road that there's unintended costs still in front of us. There was another bond authorization made by the legislature and signed by this administration. We've created what they call a contingency fund. So if you want to build your own, there's more in there than just simply the allocations. So the state is standing up. Now, this was never an essential good in service when this was first envisioned. It has become an essential good in service. And the world is changing under our feet. And we understand it from a government standpoint, and I used to serve as a state legislature, that as these obligations comes forward, there's an unintended cost that is yet to be realized. But we are supporting the towns that are choosing to go their own with the contingency fund. The make-ready work is the real challenge here, and that's the challenge that you're going to be faced whether you go alone, the town-owned municipality, whether the matrix model, there's some risks there to the make-ready work because your allocations may be exceeded. We're running into problems, and I'll use only Shutesbury as an example. They went forward, and they thought their anticipated make-ready work was about $375,000. They now have an anticipated amount of nearly $900,000. Okay, it's an estimate. These are reconciled over time. But I'm just saying to you, we're trying to manage projects town by town and project by project. The one-size-fit-all that was proposed for 8 years that never went anywhere, okay, we're now assuming trying to take projects up accordingly. We've now went through another round of a private provider RFP. It was a flexible grant program for those towns that might be willing to take on a proposal that offered them left coverage. We had responses to those towns. We have interest from a wireless provider in 4 towns. We have interest here been generated by Comcast now, but instead of just taking the state allocations, they realize that these are the tougher towns to do. The distance between residencies and premises and that. And so they've asked for a contribution, just a little bit more than what the Cartesian would propose for Worthington, but they've also made their own contribution, and they'll make more. And they've asked for a dollar amount. We, as the state, thought it was important for towns of this nature, and we've probably got 10 towns left without a path forward. We thought we'd be able to push up a little bit more to help lean in a little bit. There's no one-size-fits-all, and we're trying to make things happen. But the legislature, to their credit, and Steve, thank you, okay, has been a stalwart and brought more money to this to mitigate what they call the unknown, because this has never been done before. None of this has been done before. And I give tribute to all the providers, the Matrix, to Comcast, Westfield Gas and Electric, and anyone who's come forward to respond to our RFPs. And some of them are making sense. We see a place down the road that collaborations could occur between towns, and a Wired West could serve another purpose, okay, to be a cooperative, if you will. But we're still all running down this road of uncertainty, but we're going to be here at your side with the resources available and try to help the town make good decisions. At the end of the day, it's your decision. Yes, it's our dollars. We're all taxpayers. But I think the state has stood up and will continue to support your needs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just as a sort of side note, the MBI, the state, however you want to describe it, has relatively consistently provided funding for cable projects in excess of the original state allocation. And so this $571,000 that they're talking about for Worthington is pretty much in line with what they've done in other towns.
And just to reiterate one other piece that Peter just said, that what the state has recently committed to is towns that are building, if you run into costs on your make-ready that are higher than the original estimates, the state is going to essentially backstop that. And that's the additional allocation that was just passed this past year, right?
Yep, exactly.
My question is more about the difference between the service level agreements in terms of. Sorry, hello. The difference between the service level agreements, once we choose a provider, or during this process, what is the difference between, once it's in, how do we get outages fixed? Who's responsible for that? I mean, if we're using power lines, is there some agreement between the municipality or the municipal providers and the cable provider? So what's the difference in the service between the three?
I think that these are hard questions to answer because without knowing where we're going, we don't have really solid answers. I can say Comcast, in their own beast, right? There's not any town involvement. When they build it, it's their network, they will run it. I assume they will run it just like they do everywhere else, and they will repair outages within, I'm sure there's a window. And they have guaranteed, they will answer the phone, and it will all be specified on the webpage, and it's be consistent across the state. Matrix, Dan, do you want to say something to that?
Yeah, I will gladly step up to the microphone, but we're also signing contracts so that we will be bound by everything that I'm saying. In addition, we operate a 24/7 network operations center here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That is a center that operates, that manages and sees into every single node, fiber node that we operate through our system. When an alarm goes off in a fiber node, that network operations center is immediately notified. Me as a member of the senior leadership team is notified of that network disturbance. We immediately dispatch a fiber crew to that node. Upon arrival at the location, another dispatch goes out to let us know that they are on site and what the time is for the correction. That also varies greatly during storms. We had the October surprise snowstorm, as you will recall, back in 2011, which caused a great deal of distraction here in western Massachusetts and northern Connecticut. At that time, we were able to bring crews in from eastern Massachusetts and from New Jersey to assist with the facilitation of that. Obviously, in any system, for the safety of those involved, of all providers, power first, and power takes precedence over that. But as soon as required, we dispatch our generators onto our system in the interim when fiber is not up and running, so that the system can operate as soon as power returns. And we also have an emergency operations center. We're broken into, from Comcast, we're broken into divisions across the country. And in the Northeast Division, we are part of a region here in Western New England that runs an emergency operations center for any storm activation that operates full 24/7 out of Berlin, Connecticut, and dispatch into the facility so that we can upgrade. We also notify customers of activity through text and alert. We have 13 million Wi-Fi hotspots across the country today. During storms, we also open those up free across our network so that people have access to Wi-Fi hotspots during that time period. I have been with this company for 20 years, and with the exception of the October snowstorm, I had not seen outages as a result, except for commercial power, that have gone greater than 24 hours. Those are always fixed within a window that I see of between 6 and 8 hours, and usually very quickly after the fiber crew is dispatched on scene.
Chris from Matrix.
Well, kind of to mirror what Dan just said, the thing to remember is that the poles are actually owned by utility companies, and first and foremost, the power has to get back on. So nothing can be done until the electric company actually does their work. The poles are also owned by Verizon. So as an attachee to the pole, Verizon has to get their stuff up and going too. And then whoever's attached to the pole is allowed to fix their stuff. We built 9 towns in Vermont, EC Fiber. And during the first 3 years of their operations, we ran the network. We put into place their service policies, their billing systems, everything. We had nothing, no problems go wrong with that. The other thing I was going to mention is as far as make-ready work, the one town that you keep mentioning as far as that's been built is Leverett. Matrix and Millennium built that network. We got the make-ready work done in 6 months. It actually came in under budget. And at the end of the make-ready period, utility companies returned $33,000 to the town. So that's our experience. We do this all the time. We want to do it for the town.
So then there's the town-owned option. And I think it's somewhat uncharted. What's that? Yeah. Don't call me. The expectation is to contract with somebody to run the operations, somebody like Westfield Gas and Electric. They will position trucks somewhere so that they can respond. They have a call center in Westfield, shockingly, to answer the phone. They'll send somebody out to fix stuff.
Does that add cost?
So there will be
we
a
assume
service.
that's all in their estimates.
Okay.
I mean,
So the contracts with Westfield, which I've seen, the Wired West one is almost done, has very detailed as far as service level about response for phone calls, response for trucks, what the cost will be per truck run, and so forth. So all that'll be in whoever we contract with, I'm sure.
And I guess as just an individual, if somebody cuts the line that's coming from the road to my house, I assume that there'll be support centers and
exactly.
call centers
But
that I could personally.
It's not going to be a town employee who answers that call.
Right.
It's going to be Westwood Gas and Electric or Crocker. Matrix can see when that cable is cut, and they'll deal with it. Comcast too. I mean, it's
So not a
there'll
large
be a phone number.
differentiator necessarily between the three.
Not as far as we can see.
Okay.
Hi, this has been really helpful, so thank you for standing up here and answering all of our questions.
We still have a whole other section. We're not done yet.
Yeah, I have two questions. So I thought I read, or you've said that if we go with the Comcast option, that there's a 15-year contract commitment. Is there an equivalent something with Matrix? If there is, I didn't read it, or I haven't heard it, or I've forgotten about it, so sorry if there is.
I believe our agreement is 20 years, but yeah.
Yeah, the agreement is for 20 years. The town has the option to purchase the network anytime after 3 years. The contract is already in writing. It was done for the town of Petersham. The contract was vetted by Copeland and Page. It was also vetted by our attorney, Cindy Sayowicz, who's one of the top telecommunications lawyers in the country, and also by the Boston law firm of Leclerc Ryan to make sure that the agreement is 100% in compliance with Massachusetts general law. So the contract is already done, and it's already been given to the town.
Okay, thanks. And then my second question is, so with both the town-owned option and Matrix, we've talked about a minimum number of subscribers. Do we have an estimate from when that question was asked a number of years ago? If we're gonna, if there was enough interest at that point to hit those targets, and I know things have changed, but just curious if.
So as far as I know, there have been 2 surveys done in the last, I don't know how many years. First by Wired West when they asked for a sign-up fee, and the second by the Broadband Committee, I think it was, 2 years ago, a while ago. In both those cases, and I'm going off the top of my head, but we got about 250 responses, which is not 650. Of those 250 responses, we got about 200 yeses. So there's been a lot of debate. Do we assume that everyone who was going to say yes said yes, and so there are only 200 people in town who want broadband? Or do we extrapolate and say about 80% of the respondents said they wanted broadband, and so 80% of the town is going to want broadband?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is somewhere in between, which gives me hope that we should be able to hit the 280 and probably the 365.
Thanks.
There were about 220, I believe, that put up the $49 for the Wired West sign-up campaign.
Chris.
Just as an aside, in the town of Petersham, they're slightly smaller. Their required number was 270. They actually are now at 362, which is about 70% of the town. So they met their number with no problem.
Yeah. And that's consistent. I mean, Leverett is over 80%, I believe, of their town is subscribed. I mean, it's pretty consistent. But
The same was true in Mount Washington, which completed their network this past fall. They're up in the 70-80% range.
I just want to make sure I understand this. The town option, I call it the Jello option, but anyway, we have to borrow the most money. Matrix, we borrow less money. And Comcast, we actually borrow money, but it's from the state.
It's technically not called borrowing.
But we have to pay it back.
We do have to pay it back, and there will be interest, but it's not, we don't authorize borrowing.
So the matrix option, is that the only one that doesn't increase our taxes?
Matrix has the possibility of increasing our taxes because the state could decide not to reimburse us the $1 million. Seems unlikely that that's going to happen. I think politically that would be challenging, but it's possible. The town-owned option has the possibility of not raising the taxes, assuming the subscriber rate is really high and the number of subscribers is really high and the costs are at least what we estimated, if not lower. So those two have the option of, or the possibility of not increasing our taxes, but they both have risk. The town-owned option, I think it has more risk of raising taxes than the matrix.
Okay, and then if for some reason we fail, or we're still on the hook for all three of them then?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I'm thinking obsolescence or something like that. There are new technologies coming out, and there will be competition and lowered prices and so on. And so
after 10 years, some fantastic new thing comes, and in the town-owned option, if we lose subscribers after 10 years, at some, what happens? The subscriber price goes up a lot, and at some point, that's unsustainable. And do we turn off the network? Let's say we do. Let's say really dramatic. You just like it not working, kill it. We're still paying the debt on the town-owned option. The taxpayer will have to cover that debt. In the matrix option, if after 10 years something comes and the subscribers all run and leave matrix, assuming we haven't bought the network, matrix loses their shirt. The taxpayer is out, whatever. I mean, we'll know what the taxpayer implication of matrix is as soon as the network is turned on, because that's when the state makes its decision. Will they reimburse us the costs or not?
And that's at 1-point-something million that...
Okay. Our estimated cost is now 960 something thousand, and they have allocated up to 1.07 million, so it should be able to cover our costs. Comcast, again, if after 10 years everyone leaves their network, that's completely on them. I don't know. I assume we still owe the state for that, but have you guys...
You have an obligation over, as you described,
over 15 years.
$5 per household for 15 years.
Yeah.
55%. You can make it, you can pay that through your cherry sheet distribution, and you can also layer into that, let's say if you've got a stabilization fund or inside your levy limit already, you have obligations coming on and off your budget on a yearly basis. The intent was that this obligation to the town wouldn't begin until fiscal year 20. Okay, was our thought. Because the point is, it's going to take a while to be built. We pay Comcast up front, okay, and then you just go forward and pay it. So they minimize some risk.
Joe, you want to say something?
Joe knows more about this than I do.
Yeah, I will simply say that, with the state coming up front with giving additional 571,000, that left a gap of 571 that we had to come up with. So they, instead of just walking away and doing nothing, they also gave us an opportunity or an option of how we could pay that back, or how we could fund that, our side of the gap. And they suggested that they would upfront the whole gap, and then we would pay them back as a cherry sheet assessment, which is a line item on the cherry sheet. It's been around for probably 30 some odd years. One example is a small town road assistance program where towns would borrow or would contract with the state to do a particular road project. The state would upfront the money, and then the town would pay back a certain percent over the same cherry sheet assessment. So they've stepped up and allowed us to use this same kind of a program. Now, if we go the route of the cherry sheet assessment, do 15 years, that first contract with Comcast is 15 years, so it makes sense to have the payback in line with that contract. That represents $38,000 a year. That would be on the cherry sheet assessment. Right now, we have over 300,000 in cherry sheet assessments, and that is automatically calculated into our budget. So adding $38,000 more to something that's already on there for over 300, it's somewhat minimal. There are other options. If we did not want to put that on the assessment, we could somehow just pay that off through taxation, raising it over a couple of years, going to our stabilization fund. And each year, even if we sign up for this 15 years payback, each year we can take a look at it, and it is flexible enough. If we want to, pay something out of an available fund instead of having it flow through taxation, we can do that as well. So that would be looked at each time we put the budget together and see what is the best fit for what's happening in that budget year. Bottom line, it's giving us a lot of flexibility, where if we had to come up with that 571,000 all at once, I think it would be pretty well not doable. So now we have a number of options, and I need to appreciate the state for stepping up and looking at that and giving that us option.
But I think what I hear is not being quite said is that were something to happen and Comcast to disappear, Worthington would still be on the hook for 571,000. On the other hand, I can imagine that if Comcast disappeared in those first 15 years, A, Comcast would be pretty upset, and B, the state would be pretty upset. So I think we can't really say what would happen.
Hello. Okay. So I was just curious. One thing I haven't seen is we've seen like upload, download speeds, all that. Do any of these options come with caps where speeds are reduced after however much?
No data caps.
Okay. Thanks.
I just want to reiterate or confirm what Bob had said about the taxes. So the town-owned option is we might have to pay taxes. The Matrix-owned option is we might have to pay taxes. The Comcast-owned option is we definitely pay taxes. More
That's
taxes.
how I might say the town-owned we might, the Matrix we probably won't, and the Comcast we will.
Absolutely will.
Now,
Correction. I mean, on the Comcast, which I thought I just said, and it was not clear, if it goes on the cherry sheet, it will affect your taxes. Each year we can determine if we want to appropriate something at town meeting or change our budget so it doesn't. So that's a might also.
All right. One last question, and then we'll move to part 3.
Tim Cena, couple questions. One last question?
No, you can take them
Then the
all.
most important one is, which one of these options generates the most or the highest taxable entity so Worthington can charge them taxes? Now, big thing, AT&T and all these people that claim to own these poles that have been paid for 50 times over already say that a replacement value of a pole is $5,000. Well, every time they replace a pole, they should pay increased taxes. If they put in a $3 million system, we should be able to collect taxes on $3 million. Do any of your companies pay taxes to the town in which you set the systems up?
We pay personal property taxes in all.
Okay, personal property. See, that's exactly what, that will decrease the amount of cost to the taxpayer and to the ratepayers if we get a fair return on what the investment value is, especially when it comes to the pole people, because they only, from what I've heard, they only pay $17,000 a year in taxes for a system that they claim is worth millions and millions. Now, if AT&T wants to charge Worthington to put lines on their poles, then we either should get more taxes based on the value of what the whole system is worth, or they should have to put that up there at no charge.
You want to take that one, Charlie? I can't really speak to
No,
it.
I don't really have an answer for that. I don't. I'm not really intimately familiar with the tax situation on that, so I can't address it. The make-ready costs are basically the costs to pay AT&T, Verizon and EverSource to move their wires. Mostly it's Verizon. Power is always at the top, telephone's always at the bottom. You have to have, I think it's 18 inches between the fiber and either one of those. So in some cases the room's already there. In other cases they've got to move usually the telephone wire down to make space. And in some cases a pole has to get replaced because it doesn't have the capacity anymore. But those are the things. That's what we're paying for when it comes to make ready, and that's why that number is so hard to come up with, because it really depends. Until you do a survey of the poles and look at each one and what the situation is, you can't say.
Chris, you wanted to say something? Then.
Yeah, just as an aside, we're offering the town as a true partnership, and as part of that partnership, we're giving free internet service to 3 municipal buildings that's chosen by the town. That has a value of about $3,600 a year. So $3,600 a year for 20 years. That's what we're basically giving up.
Joe?
Just go back to Tim's point. Any personal property that it's hung on poles, whoever owns that personal property and any other equipment will be assessed by the assessors in the town, and they will be charged in a personal property tax.
All right. You want to go?
I think, though, it's a little more unclear, at least from the DOR, and I didn't know if Peter Larkin had a clearer answer more recently about whether the sort of joint arrangements here that are being talked about, because it's a sort of town-owned and matrix-owned system, whether it's as clear as the other utilities about just text if it's on the pole. Right.
So Matrix will own the fiber.
Matrix
so
will own the
therefore
fiber.
It could be taxed.
Comcast has been taxed in other settings, and yet it seemed to be an open question with the DOR whether this was true in this setting.
No, they'll be taxed like they would put any other product on the pole, similar to
Okay.
personal property.
Right.
One point though, Bart,
go ahead.
Your town-owned system, 1.79 million town share. Okay, you're borrowing that, but you're building it into subscriber paid and the subscriber fee.
Excuse me. That's not me.
Right?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
The 1.79 will, if all goes well, get paid for by the subscribers.
But that's,
mostly.
That's a borrowing on the town. So versus the state's proposal for Comcast is only $570 a month.
Yes.
So that should be clear. Okay, so the obligation is different. You built it into the subscriber paying it back versus what the model that you submitted with Comcast would be. Comcast minimum is like $60 for a minimum broadband speed. And then, of course, the obligation, if you were to carry it internally off your cherry sheet, is about, I think it was
$55 a year for the average.
So just so you know, I mean, you're borrowing the money, but you're paying for subscribers aren't, you know.
There's no question that the debt authorization is larger for the town-owned option. There is no debt authorization for the Comcast model, although the town will be on the hook for $571,000 over 15 years. Joe?
I just want to reiterate whoever owns that personal property that's on the poles or any other equipment, it's not an open question. It is taxable personal property. It will be taxed. If it's the town-owned option and we own it, then it's exempt and we won't be paying taxes on it ourselves. But anybody else who owns it will be charged.
Okay. I'm seeing no more questions, and that's great. So the last piece is, how is this decision going to be made? And it has two parts. First, town meeting, and the second, after town meeting. So we're going to, there'll be 3 articles on the warrant on next Saturday. There'll be, actually on the warrant, there'll be articles 3, 4, and 5. I didn't know that when I made the slide, so here they're 1, 2, and 3. But the first article will be to authorize borrowing of up to $2.1 million for a town-owned network. The second article will be authorizing the borrowing of the 1.07 for Matrix, and the third article will be to support the Comcast proposal, which requires no debt authorization. So the first 2 require debt authorization, therefore they require a 2/3 majority to pass. The third does not require any debt authorization, therefore it's a simple majority to pass. The procedure is as follows. The moderator will entertain a motion for the first article. Hopefully that motion will be made and seconded, and then we'll have discussion. During that discussion, we'll talk about all three articles. It'll be a free-ranging conversation about, and that's when opinions get to be expressed about what is best for the town. At some point, I hope that conversation will come to an end, that discussion, and we'll come to a vote. We'll vote as to whether the town wants to authorize 2.1 million or not. And if they say yes, they do want to authorize 2.1 million, then that decides the larger issue. At that point, the town will have selected the town-owned option. They will have authorized 2.1 million in borrowing, and we won't consider the Matrix option or the Comcast option. We'll simply go on to the rest of town meeting. On the other hand, if that first article fails to pass by a 2/3 majority, then we'll go on to the second article. That article is about Matrix. Again, we can have discussion. At some point, that discussion will end and we'll have a vote. And again, if the vote passes, the town will have decided Matrix. That will be what happens. We'll authorize that comes to a second point, but they will have voted to authorize the 1.07, and we will move forward with Matrix. If it fails, we'll come to the third option. Again, discussion and a vote. With luck, the town will actually decide that the first two failed. If you want broadband, vote for this one, because that's it. If it fails, if Comcast fails, that's it. We don't build broadband. We're done. So the key to this whole thing is compromise. If you really want broadband, I encourage you to vote yes for all of them, or whatever. But I mean, some of you may feel strongly that you want Matrix or you want the town-owned or the Comcast. Hopefully, if your first choice fails, you'll vote yes on the next one, because it brings you broadband. Obviously, if you really you don't believe it should be done, then vote against it. But this works on the assumption that the people who were unhappy because Article 1 didn't pass will suck it up and vote yes on B or C because they want to make broadband happen. And if they don't, then we don't have broadband. So Joe wants to speak to this.
I guess I want to be kind of blunt here. We all see what's going on in Washington, where our elected officials cannot compromise on anything. It's my way or I'm going to vote no on everything else. It is simply a battle. I'm going to shoot you, and if you don't go along with me, and I'm going to shoot the wounded. We are better than that. This has to be a compromise. We all can have opinions on what is best, and when we vote, if yours doesn't make it, you can't vote no on all the others because yours didn't pass. You need to be able to compromise, have a second choice if your first choice doesn't happen. We want to walk away with a compromise if necessary, but with broadband. I hate to bring this up, but it's been said over the last few years where we've gone to town meeting for a number of years trying to decide what to do with the Moran property. And by the way, there's going to be another article on the warrant this year for another reason. But if you can remember of all of those different proposals over the years, some people voted for it, others because they didn't want it voted against it, so we walked away with nothing happening. So Ralph's house is still sitting there. The roof is about to cave in, and we're going to be looking at it again. Don't turn broadband into a Moran situation. Keep in mind what your first choice is, but be open-minded to compromise so we walk away with a broadband option. Thanks.
I'm very sorry, but I do agree that compromise is very important. That being said, in the end, there is a contract. So if we're compromising and then we're all compromising down to the lowest common denominator, that is a 15-year contract for Comcast. So keep that in mind, too.
It's a 15-year contract that we don't own, yes.
So just as a
broadband.
Technical note, in reality, that last vote on Comcast is actually considered a non-binding vote and a recommendation, and it's just because of the way this deal is structured. It's essentially a select board decision. Not that the select board would do anything different than what the town advises, I'm sure, but technically that's the way it's structured. So.
Yes. So, part 2, after town meeting. Articles 1 and 2 authorize borrowing. That debt then needs to be excluded from the provisions of 2.5 by a special election vote. That special election will be scheduled as quickly as possible. It's going to take probably about a month, so early June we'll have a special election. You go in, you vote whether you're willing to exclude that borrowing from the provisions of Proposition 2.5. That needs a simple majority to pass, as I recall. And that's the case in either A and B. Even though we will hopefully be reimbursed for that those expenditures under the matrix model, we still have to authorize and exclude that borrowing. For Articles 1 and 2, after that debt has been excluded from Proposition 2.5, after that has passed, then we'll go into a pre-subscription period, 90-day window. We'll run around and try to get as many people to sign up as possible. There will be a sign-up fee. It'll be $125 for the town-owned option. It'll be $125 for the matrix option, plus $125 spread over the first year of contract. So their total is $250, but it's $125 when you write the check to sign up. As we said before, the town-owned needs 280 people to sign up. The matrix needs 365. Those are the first two where it's a fiber to the home network. The third one, Comcast, when that motion passes, it is as Charlie said, that recommends to the select board that they sign agreements. They'll sign an agreement with the state and they'll negotiate a franchise agreement and sign it with Comcast directly. There's no special election. There's no pre-subscription. They need to sign some paperwork, and that's it. Okay, that's the end. So we have questions. Before we get there, I want to thank my fellow members of this broadband group. It has been an extremely dedicated group. We've met weekly for almost 2 years. I really appreciate their dedication and their wisdom in navigating what has been a rather stormy sea. Before we go to questions, I want to give them a chance to talk and express what I've missed, express their thoughts. So I want to give them the floor, and then we'll do questions. Anybody?
Yeah, that's you covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, questions from the floor, and there are handouts at the back if you didn't get them at the beginning. Questions?
So my question is, if we go with the Comcast option, and after 15 years, they say, bye-bye Worthington, what is the likelihood that the state would give us either the $500,000 or the $1 million to build our own network at that point?
I can't speak to that. I have no idea. I don't think anyone... Steve, you want to answer that one? It won't be there. Yeah.
I would say, I think it's highly unlikely when all of the towns that are currently underserved or unserved are served, that the broadband build-out initiative that the state's undertaking is going to continue. Would you say it's going to shut down once this job is completed?
My charge, shut it down.
There you go.
Yeah.
Scott Smith. I have a question on, which I've heard answered, but on Comcast and the state funding an extra $571,000 and then assessing the town to pay that back. And you also said that there was not a slush fund, but another bond, gray fund that could come through for overcost. So it just sounds sort of crazy when you're willing to kick another $500,000 to Comcast, but not to the town or to Matrix, which offers the option of us buying it back. Isn't that discriminatory? I will say that I'm in business. I do my best to treat everybody equal, and it is taxpayer money. So where does the state MLBI come off not treating everybody fair? Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me try to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that thought. Listen, at the end of the day, this is, as I said earlier, this whole proposal to bring broadband to the community has been floundering for 8 years up till now. The Baker-Polito administration needed to bring flexibility to the program. The things that are important for us is affordability and sustainability, okay? In other words, operational sustainability is the big challenge. After 15 years, Comcast isn't going to leave this community. They haven't done it anywhere else, nor have other cable companies done that, just for the record, all right? So what has occurred with this administration was, instead of the one-size-fits-all, premised upon the allocations, that I used the word Cartesian model, okay, we couldn't get any solutions forward. We couldn't make those things happen. The only outlier was Leverett, who went it alone, all right, and was funded as it went, okay? Now they've done a very good job to show it how a municipality could do that. We had put out a request for proposals for private providers. We got nominal response. Those cable companies, to their credit, just took the state's allocation. Remember, the state allocation represented about 1/3 of what a broadband network would have cost to build in the town. The towns would have to come up with 2/3 of the dollars. That was the original concept. When I first walked in the door and took on this responsibility, it was amazing to me. I said, what? The state's putting up 1/3, and you're asking the towns for 2/3? That was a lot, okay? So the proposal was for the private provider RFP. And to their credit, they stood up and they said, okay, we'll take that 1/3 of money and we'll build into those numbers of towns, and they have. And they offered it to other towns as well. And some of the other towns said, we don't want a cable company, and that's their choice. Now, we still have 40 towns we had to fulfill. So we then created what we called the Housing and Economic Development Last Mile Grant Program, where they took the towns, or the state's allocation, 1/3 of that money, okay, and they basically said, we can build it from a governmental standpoint between municipality and the state, working with a private provider that is now just the project manager, which is Westfield Gas and Electric, and build them accordingly. Now, those towns intend, when they're going out the door, they're using the state dollars first. They're also intending to put 60% of the money into those projects. They're borrowing their money to do that. That's what those towns have decided to do, because they believe that the fiber solution for their community was what's important. So going forward, we also realized in this last bond authorization in the state, there was a problem with the make-ready work. Make-ready work is the great unknown. Finding the space on those poles is going to become a real burden. And what we've done is we've set aside another amount of the money, $12 million. Those towns right now are getting $19 million from the state. We've set aside another $12 million, what we call a contingency fund. So if make-ready exceeds, so the town wanted to go forward with this proposal, they're going to borrow money, got it, but it's going to be paid back through the subscribers. But what we're trying to do is forestall the unknown make-ready work, so that they wouldn't be overexposed in what you just thought you would borrow for. That's a good thing that the state has done that. Yeah, we've changed the rules. We changed the rules because every town is different. This has never been done before. And we will continue to try to find solutions that fit each town. So we went through the flexible grant program after the private provider RFP only provided us 5 solutions. We then go to the flexible grant program. And we said to towns, would you be willing to take proposals for less than 96%? Some of them weren't that interested. That being said, the cable companies said, okay. I think they originally came into this town and offered a 75% solution, and then they came back with a 96% solution. They've made a contribution to that project as well. That being said, we saw that it was important enough for this town, the challenges thereof, to push a little more money up in front of these. To that end, remember, all the other towns have a contingency fund. So we're trying to understand their needs as well. So what we're trying to do at the end of the day is get broadband in these communities, and we're going to do it one by one. There's no formula. I will say to you, it's called equitable. It's not equal. It's equitable. And I use this analogy. I come from a family of 8 brothers and sisters. When we were offered meals during the day, some people had more and some people had less. But there wasn't anything left over. All right? There was nothing left over. My point is, we are charged to provide broadband services to your communities. This has grown up underneath us as an essential good and services. And a little bit more money to make sure that Worthington works, or Middlefield, or Charlemont at the very same time helps the total. So asking me to be fair, we have Matrix as an example, okay, and I applaud them coming forward with a proposal. All right, they would not be willing to provide any financial materials to the state of the choice. We've asked, you have proposals.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't want to get into this.
Yeah. But my point is, I don't need to either, but my point is, there are some that we do what we call payment in arrears, because they have their own business model, which we respect, which we'll do, and that's why they're borrowing the money, and we'll make good of it if the choice is the town to go in that direction. Where this is completely flexible in that regard.
No, he hasn't answered the question, and perhaps I'm in a better position to at least give an opinion. It is the case that the state has been very generous. The state is putting money up to build this network in all these small towns, and they are looking to cover 1/3 to 40% of the costs. It is also the case that additional funding was allocated to cover specifically cost overruns during Make Ready, which is that first phase where we go out and we count the poles and figure out, okay, Verizon, you say this pole is too short, I say it's not, and we get in a fight about how much that pole is going to cost. We move wires around. Those costs are really hard to predict. The Cartesian model, which was the original estimate that all these numbers are based on, they did a sort of sitting at a computer and looking at a screen and trying to count poles. They got wildly off in some towns. We don't think they're too far off in Worthington, but we don't have a really good way of knowing. The state has come forward and allocated money to help those towns where the pole count was wildly off, because the pole count drove much of the cost estimates. There is some question in our mind. It allocated money to cover cost overruns during Make Ready. Those Make Ready costs are likely to lead into cost overruns during construction. We don't think there's money available from the state to do that, but that's an open question. It is also pretty undeniable that when a cable company is interested in building in town, the state is more willing to put more money in. They have done that repeatedly. It does feel like Worthington is about in the right ballpark. They seem to have about a number that makes sense to contribute to the cable company being in town. They have a preference, well, maybe they don't have a preference, but they're willing to put more money when a cable company is coming in. You can look at the numbers and you can see that that's the case. Dan, you want to go there? Okay.
Yeah, I do think it's important to note that the cost estimate that we put forward is an estimate. Anything above that and the contributions will be entirely absorbed by Comcast.
Yes.
We are not going back to the state. And
Nope.
We are not going to the town for any additional cost whatsoever.
And I think that's, if I had to express an opinion about the state's position, they view the cable companies as a pretty safe partner. They understand that the cable companies have the financial backing, that if the estimates are way off, the cable companies can put more money into it, they can invest more money into it, they can make the job happen. So from the state's perspective, it's a better investment to invest in the cable companies. The town-owned options always have a risk. Dan.
Just an example of that, in the Make Ready in the 9 towns that we did, in specific communities, they greatly exceeded the estimate. And under that 9-town agreement, we never went back to the state. We absorbed that cost within Comcast.
Right. That all being said, when you look at it, if it's a cable build, they get more money than if it's a town-owned or matrix town-owned sort of hybrid. That is the fact. And I don't think we're going to change that. So, any other questions? Or are you?
I was just curious what the 125 town option sign-up fee goes to. How come
That's a very good
we're doing
question.
that in this town when they haven't done that in other towns?
Yeah, so we decided to charge a $125 sign-up fee for a variety of reasons. One is we want to make sure that it's easy to sign your name, say, yeah, I'd love to take service. Well, when you write a check, it becomes a little more serious. So one is just to make it serious. Another is when we developed all this, we thought we had two options, town-owned or Matrix, and we were trying to make them exactly the same. So Matrix had to have a sign-up fee because that's their business model. So we said, okay, we'll do a sign-up fee too. In both cases, you write the check, it goes into an escrow account. If we don't build the network, it comes back to you. There's no loss.
If you do build the network.
If we do build the network, then that gives us money to start up. We don't quite know what that means. This is all a pretty new thing. It will be used for whatever the cost. The fact is, cash flow is, there's a bunch of startup costs. So having that pool of money is useful.
And so that 125 would just go to that. It wouldn't give us our first month free or something.
If we got into it and realized, hey, wait, we could do some sort of first month free, maybe we'd do that. But at this point, it seems like there are good reasons to do it. Mm-hmm. I haven't found any really bad reasons to do it, and we can decide what exactly happens to that money once we know we're actually doing a town-owned option.
Right.
Okay. So you have to have some money in the bank. Yeah. So if you need repairs in that first year, you've got to have some money to pay for that. Okay. And Wired West, for example, has a $99 per subscriber sign-up fee. We certainly haven't discussed this or made any decisions. We could decide that 99 out of that 125, should we decide to have Wired West operate the network, would just go there. And again, that money is for the exact same reason, so that there is contingency money across the network to fund repairs from the get-go when necessary.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually, that was part of the conversation, that if we decided to do Wired West later, then there'd be this awkward, wait, I already subscribed, but I do have to do it again. So this allows us to just flow that money through, and Wired West needs that sign-up fee, so we can flow it through and make it work.
Okay. And there is that $49, and if you did already pay that, in Wired West case, that would go towards your first month's service.
Oh, but you can't say that because the 125 we collected, so yeah. It is the case that if you want your $49.95 back from Wired West, you can write them a letter and get it back.
Absolutely. That's all sitting in escrow. So
this is a request for town meeting just for super clarification of what the vote is, because I came into this thinking that I would raise my hand for my favorite, and the one that got the most votes won, like an election. It's not an election, I'm understanding. It's that if the second option is my first choice, but the first option is one that I would want to happen, I need to vote for both of those, because if the first one doesn't pass, it's not going to happen.
On the other hand, I would say that it seems to me, and this is opinion, and I am very sympathetic that it is hard to wrap your brain around this process. But I think that I feel that the number of people who support A is smaller than the number of people who support B, and that's smaller than the number of people who support C. And so if you're a real B supporter, you can vote for A or not, it doesn't matter. But if A fails, it doesn't mean that B is going to fail, right? Because there are going to be more people to join you.
But
hopefully the A people will vote for the B because they want broadband.
No, I think it's just really important that Kevin or whoever is setting up the vote clarify that anything that you're willing to consider, you should vote for, not just voting for your favorite. Yeah.
There is a separate handout that we tried to put together, understanding that this is going to be very complicated. So if you haven't gotten that, take it. It tries to explain the vote and the ramifications of how you vote. Keep in mind that the debt authorizations, which are the two first articles, for them to pass, state law requires a 2/3 majority. So if in the case of A, which authorizes the biggest number, doesn't garner the 2/3 vote, it is the hope then that people who supported A will then vote for B, and that combined will get the 2/3 needed for that to pass. If that doesn't get 2/3, then clearly the town doesn't want either one of them, and they've had two chances to get 2/3, then it moves on to the third option.
I think what you suggested, Allison, is essentially ranked voting, which exists for office in some towns, where you can literally say my first choice, second choice, third choice, and so forth, and then that all gets factored in so they don't have to have second votes if somebody doesn't get a majority. there is no such thing for a town meeting vote. There's just, particularly with the whole borrowing issue.
I'm just requesting that you make that really clear because I'm perhaps more oblivious to how it works than most people, but I didn't get that initially, and so I may not be the only one.
So I'm sure Kevin will be going out of his way to explain this on next Saturday.
So for the town-owned option, to get costs down to each individual subscriber, we're needing a 10% growth over X number of years.
I just picked 10%.
Okay. So for that, each of those new customers after the year one, are they going to be ponying up the $2,500?
That's a darn good question. I mean, I think that number, that $2,500, is it's sort of the upper limit. There's no
but
reason.
That's the cost.
What's that?
But that is the cost according to Leverett, right?
That's our best understanding of the actual cost to put in a new drop. Obviously, every drop will be different, but getting a truck out here and making it happen. There's no reason, if we start and we have only 280 people subscribe, I'm going to be shocked and concerned, but I think we'll have a conversation. Do we have look for the next 3 years? You sign up, it's $10. I don't know. We need subscribers. I'm not going to say that they will be charged $2,500. I'm just saying that is the actual cost. How we pay it, I'm not quite sure. Yes, please.
I think the MLP board will have to determine. You have to think it's much, much easier to hook up during the construction period. So those who don't take advantage of that, the crews have gone and left. So if somebody comes in, a year later and wants to sign up and hook up, I think personally, as a member of the MLP board, it most likely will be the actual cost. It's not going to be $2,500 if it doesn't cost $2,500. But if it costs X amount of dollars to roll a truck and a person or whatever to hook that up, that's what you're going to be expected to pay. It could be a whole lot less. If there's 3 of you on your street that want to hook up, then obviously that truck is coming out to do 3 people, and the cost could be divided, apportionately amongst the 3 of you.
So I think there's room there, right? We can try to batch them together but yeah.
Question going back to the very first slide that showed an internet structure with a big orange Springfield on top and a line going to Worthington. Is that our middle mile, or is that some new piece of cable that has to be strung?
It's nothing new. It may be the middle mile. It may be something else. Chris, I assume you're looking middle mile, but I'm not sure.
We're looking at all options.
Yeah, at all options. So
it could be just a connection to our neighbor, to Chesterfield or Cummington, who has already connected to the internet on the middle mile, or there in other parts of Western Mass there are some other fiber lines. We actually have Verizon fiber running out here too. I don't think that's an option, but you couldn't say for sure. And ideally, a network that we build will have at least 2 connections. So if one goes down, and you try to build a ring if you can for that reason.
I just didn't, that question has resonated in my mind for a while because you hear so much about Axia and the potential, dark cable there. I don't know how much we can depend on that.
I think the assumption is that it will be there if we need it, and that there may be other options that may be cheaper.
Okay.
I think the state's pretty committed. I mean, it remains to be seen exactly how they deal with it, but it's just hard to imagine them letting that go dark.
With any concern with Axia or anything like that, the fiber itself is an asset, and so that would still be in place. And so we have an option of somehow negotiating to be able to use that. So if Axia goes away, the company itself, the actual physical cable will still be there.
I don't know if this is a question or a statement. I have concerns with how the voting is going to go down as well, in the sense that A kind of has the hardest run, and then option C is like, well, if the first 2 didn't pass, then I guess we get C. So I have some real concerns about that. I don't understand how that works in a town meeting, and I am one of the young homeowners in town, so I'm a little confused there, but I have some real reservations about it. So I don't know what we do. So I don't know if that's a question or a statement. Guess it's a statement.
Get your friends to come and vote.
I'm going to try to actually load the room if I possibly can, but it does
the
seem a
best
little
strategy.
weighted that A doesn't have the same chance that C does.
I'm not sure I'd
You could
agree to
easily
that.
say the opposite.
Could you?
Yes, because she would, from what Allison just said, she would vote for A, even though she preferred.
Hopefully, but Allison's a good person.
I mean, I'm
You know?
just saying that kind of thinking would skew it towards A. But the people who are actually in the worst position are the people like Allison who prefer B, whose first choice is B, but for whom A is definitely the second choice, who definitely don't want C. So that if A doesn't pass, if A passes, there's no further chance to vote for B.
I suppose that's true, Allison.
So it's
Yeah, and
I mean, I
hypothetically,
agree with you
like,
that it's a very complicated.
I'm like, is there no way to
strange
just
way
have
to
A
vote
and
for
B vote at like each other, and then if C has it, like, then we do C? I'm just saying.
Hey,
I hope that when you discuss this at your meeting, that your tax rate and your user fees, that you explain both on how those will work, because I know a lot of people are coming up and saying, what's my tax rate, what's my tax rate? But just remember that if you look at all the options, someone's user fees may be twice the amount. So I would just bring that up at your meeting just so it's relatively clear. Thank you.
Well, what he's saying is your user fees could be so high that they would be equivalent or greater than any increase in the tax rate. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Evans. That was basically my question too. Is the Comcast one does seem so much cheaper, maybe $500, $600, $700 a year for a budget-conscious family. And so, has there been any attempt to sort of quantify that over 15 years? In other words, what you don't get is eventual ownership of the network. So, how financially can, we're not informed. It's a very abstract mathematical thing. So, has there been any attempt to quantify all those savings that you would get with Comcast against what owning the network would be worth in 15 years?
Personally, I don't think that's possible. We don't know what the real costs of operating it ourselves are. We just have guesses. As Joe says, they're carved in Jell-O. We don't know what's going to happen to the Comcast costs over time. They're currently lower. Presumably, they would stay lower. I think that this is a complex issue, and the sort of financial calculus is not simple. For me, it comes down to an equation of risks versus control versus cost. And that's the hope, is that people can say, while I may be able to save money with this one, I'm not comfortable with the risk. Or, control is really important, and I'm not too concerned about the cost. They seem close enough to me, but control is really important. So the hope is we have these three competing things that everyone in the room can decide where they fall on that spectrum and vote, hopefully appropriately. I mean, hopefully they understand the voting process so that they feel they voted appropriately.
I think, though, on the flip side of that is it seems to me pretty clear that if a lot of the people in town sign up, if the stuff is managed well by either by the town or after enough time by Matrix, and it's cheaper, that the extra money won't be going to bondholders or stockholders in other parts of the country or the world if it's town-owned, whereas we're pretty guaranteed that we'll get charged as much as everyone else, for better or for worse in Comcast's case. So I mean, there's a possible upside on the other side if things go well.
Yeah, I think the upside risks are much more varied in both the town-owned and Matrix. Comcast is pretty concrete. We know what's going to happen. There will be some money that the taxpayers have to pay, whether it's through stabilization money or straight on the tax rate, and their rates are going to be roughly what they are, and there's no town control. I think we can be pretty concrete about that. The other ones, it's very hard to really say specifics because, as you say, a lot depends on what the actual costs are, what the actual subscriber rate is, and how well it's managed. Hopefully we can say the management will be good. But yes?
I just like to say one more thing. It's been kind of talked about, but not really said. What determines what is the best of the three options is what's going to happen in the future. I can't predict the future, and if any one of you can, I would like to talk to you afterwards. And that's the point. Every one of these options could be the best, and any one of them could be the worst, depending what the future brings. If we talked about some new technology coming in and making the network that we picked obsolete. Nobody knows if that's going to happen or not. And so if you say this is the best because I think the future is going to be this, I can say I can think this is the best because I think the future is going to be this, but nobody knows. So you're going to have to factor that into also. Don't assume that the numbers that we presented to you are good. I told you I've been struggling this for a long time. Every one of them is in jello. So if we made a mistake on our guesstimates, that's going to affect what the future is. Nothing is that we junked up together is going to happen. It's going to be different. It could be better, it could be worse. So you also have to factor into what do you think the future is going to be.
So by the same token, as Bart has said, the numbers are based on facts and on others' experience, of which there is a considerable amount out there. Certainly locally we have Leverett to look at as an example, but there are community-owned broadband networks across the country. We talked about EC Fiber up in Vermont. So this is not total unknown and guessing either. There's certainly a lot of variability, and we talked about Make Ready and how that can affect it and so forth. But we're not talking about complete unknown here either.
I don't see any more questions, so perhaps we're done? Thank you all very much for coming out. Please explain this to all your neighbors so they come to vote. And